Chapter 111 Back to Hogwarts. 2. Seeing the enormous magical castle once again after months, Asterion couldn't help but compare it to how it was before the renovation following the attacks on Hogwarts. The castle had always been large, but now it was even bigger, resembling a giant mythical fortress atop a hill. Perhaps the hill itself had been enlarged to support the base of the enormous building. At least 5 more towers had been erected around the castle, linking to the original ones. From these towers, Asterion felt an abnormal amount of magical energy. Obviously, they were not just simple towers meant for decoration or astrology classes. They were true magical defense weapons powered by the infinite energy of the ley lines. Entering Hogwarts, Asterion noticed that the medieval armors were much larger and seemed to emanate a faint wave of magical energy. It seemed that not only the towers had been updated, the entire internal system had undergone a complete upgrade. As it was still early, there were hardly any students in the corridors. The ones he saw were returning from missions and looked exhausted, apparently having stayed up all night. Asterion greeted them with a nod and found the stairs. He descended to the lower floors and arrived in front of the entrance to the Slytherin common room. He said the password. Pure blood. The door seemed alive with a silver serpent sliding over it and opening, revealing the elegant luxury of the Slytherin common room. Nothing had changed, it looked the same as always, elegant, discreet, with a soft green light illuminating the room. His seat and Daphne's near the fireplaces were untouched and properly cleaned. For some reason, he felt relaxed entering the common room. He could understand why, even after graduating from Hogwarts, people still called themselves members of their own house. This was a second home for many, almost like a refuge. Asterion didn't even have time to react to the sudden voice before he was embraced forcefully, his arms instinctively wrapping around her waist firmly. Daph. Asterion spoke gently to the blonde woman in his arms, holding her face with his left hand and claiming her lips. Daphne surrendered completely to the kiss, wrapping her arms around his neck. For a woman in love, being away from her boyfriend was nothing short of torture. Their lips met repeatedly, each kissing the other avidly, like drinking water after a long drought. Pulling away, Asterion looked at his future wife and spoke playfully, "What a warm welcome." Daphne simply surrendered completely to the kiss, intertwining her arms around his neck. For a woman in love, being away from her boyfriend was no different from torture. Their lips met repeatedly, each kissing the other avidly, as if drinking water after a long drought. Parting their lips, Asterion looked at his future wife and said playfully, "What a warm reception. If you like it, I'll greet you like this every time." Daphne laughed and spoke seductively, whispering in his ear. Just as he was about to respond equally seductively, Asterion heard a fake cough coming from the stairs leading to the dormitories. Looking to the side, he saw Tracy Davis, Theodore Knott, and Blaise Zabini looking provocatively at them. "I know you want to do it right here, but a room would be more appropriate, Asti." Tracy spoke provocatively, arms folded, her eyes shrewdly falling on Asterion and Daphne with amusement. "I'm glad to see you all are well." Asterion gestured for everyone to sit on the sofas. He himself sat in his seat. But instead of sitting in their own seats, Daphne sat on Asterion's lap with her arm around his neck. One of Asterion's hands held her waist while the other rested on her thigh. Ignoring the jealous look Tracy was giving her, Daphne asked what everyone wanted to know. "So, is it true about the tournament?" Tracy, Theodore, and Blaise looked eagerly at Asterion. Yes, 12 magical schools from different parts of the world will gather at Hogwarts for the International Tournament of Magic and Witchcraft. It will be broadcast worldwide in real time. Asterion nodded, confirming the rumors, causing the 3 Slytherin members to gasp with excitement. Just the thought of being famous worldwide almost made Theodore jump with excitement. Though calmer than his friend, Blaise couldn't hide his excitement behind his calm expression. "Tell me we can enter the tournament?" Theodore asked, his voice trembling slightly with anticipation. Beside him, Tracy and Blaise also listened eagerly. Asterion rolled his eyes at these 2 excited teenagers and replied calmly, "Although it's not official yet, for representatives will be elected from the 4 Hogwarts houses. Obviously, I won't be participating in the tournament as a contestant." Upon hearing this, Theodore and Blaise looked at each other and saw the helplessness in each other's eyes. If an election were held, 6th and 7th year students would definitely garner support from all of Slytherin, rather than 2nd year students like them. After all, it was the most obvious and safe choice aside from Asterion himself. In an international competition held in their own country, the pressure was enormous to win. After all, they were at home. So, to play it safer, the veterans would definitely represent Slytherin in this competition, making it impossible for Theodore, Blaise, and Tracy to participate. Seeing the disappointed faces of all 3, Asterion said nothing to comfort them. He himself didn't want to risk it in such an important event. After all, if England lost at home, it would be quite a blow to the still unstable reputation of the newly created clock tower. "Who do you think will be elected in the other houses?" Seeing the subdued atmosphere, with a noble and intelligent air, Daphne changed the subject with a smile on her lips, subtly feeling her hands tighten on her waist and thigh. She could tell Asterion was much more interested in her than before, making her realize that this distance over the months hadn't been entirely bad. "Hufflepuff will be Cedric Diggory," Tracy said without hesitation in her voice. She bit her lip, recalling the handsome young man with brown hair. Handsome, popular, and above all, powerful. Cedric practically screams protagonist in a book. Asterion's lips twitched hearing the name of the glittery vampire. He couldn't help but think of the boy's ultimate fate in the movies. Truly an Ice-Sky protagonist, Asterion thought with an amused smile on his lips. As for Ravenclaw, I have no idea, but for Gryffindor, I would say Rose Potter, but since she's a special grade witch, she can't participate, Tracy continued, and everyone around agreed with her words. It was completely impossible for Rose to participate in the competition. She herself was the embodiment of cheating. Chapter 112, New Students, 1, September 1, 1994. Hogwarts Great Hall. At the Slytherin table in the Great Hall, Asterion was chatting with his group, a calm and serene expression on his face. He lifted his coffee cup to his lips, showing a satisfied look. "I'm excited for the new students," Tracy said next to Theodore, her words echoed by several people at the table. "Astoria is finally joining Slytherin," Daphne added with a smile rarely seen by others. The thought of attending Hogwarts with her adorable sister was finally becoming a reality. Then, Daphne's gaze fell on Draco, like a queen looking at her subject, sharp and powerful. "If I hear that you did anything to Astoria, believe me when I say you might not have descendants in the future, Heir Malfoy." Faced with that look and those harsh words, Draco swallowed hard and gave a rather nervous smile. He clenched his legs tightly together while nodding repeatedly. Theodore and Blaise couldn't help but shrink back at the cruel words of the teenager and looked at Draco with pity. Doria, who was beside Daphne, didn't even glance at her brother. Asterion noticed this but said nothing. Anyone could see that the twins were fighting. Suddenly, Daphne felt eyes on her. Turning her face, she saw a pair of incredibly blue eyes staring at her intensely. Rose Potter. Daphne's lips curved into a smile. Although she couldn't beat the girl, she could make her feel something much more painful than the bitter taste of defeat. Under the surprised eyes of everyone at the table, the Slytherin queen sat in her special seat, which was her boyfriend's lap, and wrapped her arms around his neck. Then, with the wide eyes of the Slytherin table watching, Daphne lifted Asterion's chin and claimed the lips that were rightfully hers while looking at Rose with a sarcastic gaze. She knew Rose liked Asterion, so even if she couldn't win against Rose in a fight, the emotional damage she caused the girl by doing this was far greater than any physical harm. Crack! The fork and knife in Rose's hands snapped as if someone had broken a thin tree branch. Gritting her teeth, Rose had never held back so much from casting a red at someone as she did at that moment. Especially seeing that victorious, sarcastic look, as if to say, take a good look, because it's the only thing you'll ever get to do. Rose? Hermione, sitting next to her friend, looked at Rose in confusion and glanced at the broken cutlery with a bit of pity. Seeing Rose not responding, Hermione followed her gaze and saw Daphne and Asterion kissing publicly in the Great Hall. Hermione's mouth dropped open in shock. "Don't they know it's forbidden to do that in public?" she said incredulously, watching the intense kiss unfold. Her cheeks turned a rosy shade of embarrassment. Hermione had to take a sip of her juice to calm down after witnessing scenes she had only read about in her period romances, but Rose's next words made the young brunette spit out everything she was drinking. "PFF. I've decided. I'm going to separate Asterion from that snake he calls a girlfriend. As his cousin, I have a responsibility to think about his well-being." Rose spoke each word through clenched teeth, the scene before her making her feel as if her heart was being bitten by several snakes at once, a sensation of anxiety and breathlessness she had never experienced before. Hermione wiped her mouth and looked incredulously at her friend, unable to believe how innocent Rose was in not recognizing her own jealousy. "Don't get involved, Rose. You'll only start a war you don't want to fight." Hermione tried to reason with Rose, but seeing the determined look in her best friend's eyes, she could only give up for now. "War? That's fine. Then let's go to war," Rose murmured, looking defiantly at Daphne still sitting on Asterion's lap, who returned her gaze with the same arrogant look. The two young women exchanged glances and smiled amicably at each other, as if nothing had happened between them. "What was that?" With Daphne still on his lap, Asterion asked, confused, holding his fiancée's waist. "Nothing, I just felt like kissing you." Daphne looked at him innocently and responded in a sweet tone. Her glance shifted to the Gryffindor table, where Rose's furious face made her feel like she was floating on cloud 9. She had never been more satisfied in her life than she was today. Doria and Tracy looked bitterly at the couple, their expressions tinged with resentment. The worst pain for a friend is to see their friend dating while they remain alone in a corner, watching everything with envy. That was the situation the two young women were currently in. "Professor McGonagall is looking at our table with a glare that could kill someone," Theodore said, pointing to the teacher's table, where the Transfiguration professor was glaring at the Slytherin table with a sharp and very severe look. Daphne just smiled gently at the professor and acted as if nothing had happened. She sat back down on the bench next to Asterion, intertwining her arms with his. Although still dissatisfied with the situation, Professor McGonagall decided to address it later. She left the teacher's table and walked toward the exit of the Great Hall, ready to fetch the new students for this year. "She's definitely going to punish us with a lot of homework," Tracy murmured with a disheartened look on her face. The memory of the amount of homework she had last year sent a chill down her spine. "Don't be dramatic." "She would have done that even without any punishment," Doria responded with a very cold attitude, almost like Narcissa. After the attack on Hogwarts last year, all the teachers had doubled the amount of exercises and lessons, and everyone was exhausted from such a grueling routine. Many newcomers were dissatisfied with these changes, especially the Gryffindor members, but many also didn't complain, feeling that they were getting stronger with each week of classes since last year. Suddenly, the doors of the Great Hall opened, and Professor McGonagall, dressed in her classic emerald robes, entered the hall, followed by a long line of new students. Daphne soon spotted her sister, Astoria, among the descendants of other noble houses, mainly talking to another teenager with long black hair and red eyes. Red eyes midline horizontal ellipsis. Red eyes. Daphne's eyes widened as she saw the familiar red eyes on the girl next to her sister. "By Morgana's saggy bosom, what is happening?" Daphne murmured, looking incredulously at the pale-skinned girl with long black hair and red eyes. The girl's eyes also caught the attention of many people, both at the students' tables and the teachers' table. Dumbledore looked at Asterion and then at the girl with a puzzled expression. Both bore striking similarities, almost as if they were twins. Chapter 113, New Students, 2. Seeing Daphne's reaction, Asterion grew curious and followed her gaze. His eyes almost immediately fell on the girl with black hair and red eyes. He blinked a few times, trying to understand if he was seeing correctly, but even after blinking, the girl remained there. Frowning, Asterion tried to sense any cursed spirit within the girl, but found no trace of negative magical energy in her. The girl definitely didn't possess the Black family technique, creation and manipulation of cursed spirits. He would have sensed any cursed spirit in her. But her features practically screamed black from every angle. She even had certain similarities to him. Daughter of Sirius? This was the only possibility Asterion could think of upon seeing the girl next to his sister-in-law. Professor McGonagall placed the sorting hat on the stool. The hat, in turn, began to sing a song about how amazing and handsome it was. If there was truly anyone arrogant at Hogwarts, it was the sorting hat. Looking helplessly at the supreme creation of the Hogwarts founders, Minerva took a deep breath and focused. She picked up a parchment and unfolded it, reading the first name in her mind. She opened her mouth and spoke aloud. Weasley, Ginevra. At the professor's call, a red-haired girl with a shy expression stepped out of the crowd of first years and quickly reached the chair, sitting down. Not even 5 seconds passed before the sorting hat announced its decision. Slytherin. The Weasley twins' mouths dropped open in shock. They looked at each other and asked simultaneously. "Did you hear that right, Fred? Did you hear that right, George?" They continued to stare at each other in shock before turning to see their sister, still stunned in the chair, the color drained from her face. Even Minerva looked at the Weasley girl with a surprised expression but didn't show much importance to it. Compared to Sirius Black being sorted into Gryffindor, this was less shocking. "Miss Weasley, please proceed to your designated house table." Professor McGonagall spoke in a serious and slightly reprimanding tone, seeing the girl still stunned in the chair. Ginny nodded and climbed down from the chair, walking to the Slytherin table with stiff steps while murmuring repeatedly, "I'm dead. Mom and Dad are going to kill me." The Slytherins, although surprised by the arrival of the youngest Weasley, all clapped with great elegance, leaving Ginny even more shocked by the unexpectedly warm reception. She had expected disdainful looks or insulting words, but looking around, everyone seemed not to care much about her arrival. Asterion nodded in satisfaction. It seemed his words at the beginning of last year had had a positive effect, especially after the invasion of Hogwarts, where the Slytherin students had defended the school alongside all the other houses. This had restored the resentment against Slytherin to mere rivalries among the four houses. "Welcome, Miss Weasley. I hope your stay in Slytherin is pleasant," Daphne greeted the red-haired girl with an elegant and kind look, putting the youngest Weasley completely at ease. "Thank you, Miss Greengrass," Ginny replied with a very flattered tone. Even without attending Hogwarts, Ginny had heard about Daphne from her brothers, the beautiful Queen of Slytherin. She completely agreed with their praises about Daphne's beauty. She truly looked like a Greek goddess. "Hello, I'm Tracy Davis. I hope we get along well," Tracy laughed and greeted the newcomer after Daphne. "Doria Malfoy," Doria said curtly and nodded amiably while remaining silent. "Theodore Nott, the most handsome guy in Slytherin," Theodore introduced himself, raising his hand in the air. "Ha ha ha!" The entire Slytherin table laughed while Theodore showed clear dissatisfaction with everyone's laughter. "Dare you point to anyone more handsome than me?" he said with a mock-furious expression. Everyone pointed to Asterion, Draco, and Blaise. Theodore pretended to clutch his chest in pain and collapsed back onto the bench, powerless. Everyone laughed at Theodore's miserable appearance, including Asterion himself. Ginny also laughed and looked around at everyone laughing. For a moment, she didn't think it was so bad to be sorted into Slytherin. No one seemed like the people-eating demons her mother had warned her about while she was growing up. At the Gryffindor table, seeing their sister laughing and talking with other Slytherin girls, Fred and George's faces relaxed. As long as their sister could be happy, they didn't care if she was in Gryffindor or Slytherin. Ron, on the other hand, looked angrily at Ginny getting along with the snakes, as if he were looking at a traitor who had killed their parents. "I'm going to tell Mom and Dad." Fred and George heard this and looked at their younger brother with dissatisfaction. "No, you're not. If we find out you told," Fred said, and George finished the sentence, "don't expect to sleep at night, because we'll be playing a lot of pranks on you." "Foolish," said Fred. "Stupid," said George. "Brother," they finished together. Ron's face turned as red as his hair from anger, but the young Gryffindor lion remained silent under the intense gaze of the twins. Hermione, who was listening nearby, looked at Ron with disgust and turned away, fearing that even looking at him would dirty her eyes. Ron's behavior only confirmed her opinion of him. He was a spoiled and idealistic boy. As Hermione criticized all of Ron's flaws in her mind, Professor McGonagall continued her list calmly, calling out student after student. "Greengrass, Astoria." Her loud voice echoed throughout the great hall. A 13-year-old girl with very pale skin and blonde hair stepped forward with calm steps and a confident smile on her lips, unaffected by the thousands of eyes falling on her. Seeing the girl sit in the chair, Professor McGonagall placed the sorting hat on her head, and it took less than 5 seconds for the hat to make its decision. "Slytherin." Daphne's smile widened as she clapped, followed by the rest of Slytherin house. Astoria also smiled happily and walked over to the Slytherin table, where she sat next to Ginny Weasley. "Welcome to Slytherin, Astoria," Daphne greeted her sister with a tone almost bursting with pride. It was clear that she was extremely pleased to have her sister with her in the best house at Hogwarts. Astoria was equally delighted to be in Slytherin. She would have felt isolated in any other house. As she greeted everyone, her eyes fell on her new friend from the Hogwarts Express. Although she didn't care about the girl's family background, she knew the chances of her being sorted into Slytherin were slim at best. Asterion's eyes fell on the last girl who had not yet been sorted. Looking into her crimson eyes, he swore they seemed familiar somehow. Professor McGonagall looked at the final student and was surprised. She glanced at the parchment and her expression froze upon seeing the name. She rigidly looked at Dumbledore in the main seat for a moment before announcing the girl's name loudly. "Riddle, Ophelia." The smile on Dumbledore's lips vanished for a moment, but he quickly resumed his usual calm demeanor. Asterion's gaze, on the other hand, turned icy cold. "Slytherin." The Sorting Hat's voice echoed in Asterion's mind. He finally understood why the girl's eyes seemed so familiar. This girl was Voldemort's daughter. Chapter 114, Ophelia, 1. Watching the girl walk towards the Slytherin table, Dumbledore saw the shadow of her father overlapping with the girl. A flash of concern reflected in his blue eyes but disappeared as quickly as it appeared. Rising from the head seat, the entire Great Hall suddenly fell silent. Dumbledore smiled at all his beloved students and began to speak, his voice reverberating through the hall. "First, let us welcome all the new students." With his words, all the students started clapping, a barrage of applause sounding extremely loud, causing the new students to look at the headmaster with excitement. As the applause died down, Dumbledore continued speaking. "Some rumors are circulating about a supposed tournament of magic and witchcraft." Dumbledore paused and looked at the visibly anxious and excited students with a smile, then continued, "The rumors are true. Hogwarts will host the International Magic and Witchcraft Tournament." As soon as he finished speaking, the hall erupted into complete chaos, with screams of excitement and joy. Even the older students, accustomed to fighting cursed spirits, could not hide their excitement at this moment. "We must win." Gryffindor shouted loudly, full of bravery. "We will win with our minds." The Ravenclaw students, not wanting to be left behind, shouted together. "We will win together." Hufflepuff shouted loudly. "We will win at all costs." The Slytherin students followed suit and shouted loudly together. For the first time in hundreds of years, all four houses of Hogwarts seemed truly united for a moment. This made the professors look at each other in surprise and smile at one another. Seeing something like this brought a very pleasant feeling to them. Dumbledore smiled at the scene in front of him and resumed speaking when the applause and shouts ceased. 12 magical schools around the world will participate in the tournament. It has been decided that each school will present 4 representatives to compete in the international tournament. Dumbledore patiently explained a few things, and all the students listened attentively, afraid of missing any details. A selection will be held to decide each representative of Hogwarts. You will be able to vote for whom you believe can bring victory to Hogwarts. The date of the selection will be the same day all the schools arrive at Hogwarts. Dumbledore finished explaining and turned his gaze to the teacher's table, where a man in a beautiful blue suit and a charismatic smile stood up, drawing everyone's attention. Those who already recognized the man stood up and shouted, trying to get their idol's attention, especially the girls, who seemed to be seeing their god. Dumbledore looked at the blonde man with a deep gaze and announced with a smile, after the disappearance of Professor Quirinus, "We are pleased to announce that Gilderoy Lockhart is our newest member of the Hogwarts Teaching Committee. He will assume the position of defense against the dark arts professor in place of Professor Quirinus." With that said, the headmaster of Hogwarts took the initiative to clap, followed by everyone else, welcoming the new professor to Hogwarts. Dumbledore sat back in his seat while bringing the metal goblet to his lips, watching Lockhart and narrowing his eyes thoughtfully. "Thank you for the kind words, Professor Dumbledore." Gilderoy first thanked Dumbledore and then looked at all the students with a sense of pride. "You are lucky to have the best teacher you could ever have," he began, causing some girls to scream with joy. Winking elegantly at the girls, Gilderoy continued speaking with a broad, impeccably white smile. "I will fulfill the sacred duty of teaching young witches and wizards with all respect and pride. By the way, be sure to purchase the latest edition of my book, Vampires and Their Macabre Stories." Snape, at the teacher's table, scowled at the shamelessness of the new defense against the dark arts professor. His eyes, dark as two black holes, stared at Gilderoy with a touch of dissatisfaction. The other professors were also displeased that a peacock like Gilderoy had secured one of the most coveted positions in British magical society. At the Slytherin table, Asterion looked at the fraud with a hint of disgust in his eyes. Weak, Gilderoy was terribly weak, not even a level 2 wizard. At the same time, he wondered why Dumbledore had chosen such a worthless piece of trash to be a professor at Hogwarts, especially for one of the most important classes, Defense Against the Dark Arts. Sipping some wine from his goblet, Asterion looked at the man sitting in the head seat at the teacher's table, who seemed to feel his gaze and raised his goblet, greeting him with a smile. Asterion raised his own goblet and smiled back at the man over 100 years old. Then, his smile completely disappeared as his gaze fell upon the girl beside Astoria and Ginny, his supposed cousin, Ophelia Riddle. Bellatrix had a daughter with Voldemort. That was the only possibility he could think of at that moment. But if such a thing happened, Bellatrix would certainly have told him. He did not doubt his mad cousin's loyalty. So, one option remained. Voldemort had used Obliviate on Bellatrix, making her forget she had a daughter with him. Only a powerful wizard like Voldemort could use Obliviate on an extremely powerful witch like Bellatrix Black. Any other wizard would have had their head ripped off before they could cast the spell on Bella. If it were true, then Ophelia was his cousin, and he had killed the girl's father. If Ophelia grew up without a father or mother, then Asterion was almost sure that Ophelia would hate him if she found out her true parentage. After all, only an orphan or someone abandoned knows how lonely it is to grow up without someone by their side. Any orphan yearning for parental love would give anything to grow up with their parents, regardless of whether those parents were good or bad. Love truly was an extremely complicated feeling. Suddenly, Asterion felt a delicate hand intertwine with his. He turned his head and saw Daphne looking at him with a calm and somewhat concerned expression. "You seem worried," Daphne whispered, gazing at him with her beautiful icy blue eyes. It was the first time she had seen such an expression on her fiancé, who had always been confident and calm in any situation. She didn't know what was going on, but she knew it had something to do with the new Slytherin student, Ophelia Riddle. The resemblance between Asterion and Ophelia was obvious. All the Slytherins had noticed it, but no one said anything to avoid creating an awkward atmosphere. "Come to my room tonight, and I'll tell you everything," Asterion whispered, deciding to tell Daphne about Voldemort's true identity. Letting out a tired sigh, he felt that the coming days would be stressful, but first, he needed to talk privately with Ophelia and question her amicably. Daphne nodded and asked no more questions. She began to lift the atmosphere at the table with a few words, making it more lively and relaxed for the new freshmen. With the end of Gilderoy's presentation, dinner was served, appearing suddenly on the table, shocking the new Muggle-born students. They were still amazed by this new magical and beautiful world, but they didn't know that behind this beauty lay a very cruel and cold world. But that they would have to face at another time. For now, everyone focused on the delicious food on the tables, enjoying the most magical moment of their lives. Chapter 115, Ophelia, 2. The entire ceremony for the new students ended, and the house monitors led the new students to their respective houses, heading toward their common rooms. The password to enter the common room is Pure Blood. Marcus Flint, who took over as the Slytherin monitors after his predecessor graduated, told all the new students. "Don't forget it, or you'll have to sleep outside or wait for someone to open the door for you." Beside him, guiding the girls, was Clarissa Higgs, the female Slytherin monitors who took over after her predecessor left. "Slytherin has strict rules, but you can read the rules in your respective dormitories," Ginny heard Clarissa say as she looked around, mouth agape, at the elegant and luxurious environment of the common room. Glancing out the window, she swore she saw a huge octopus tentacle appear for a moment. "Are all the common rooms like this?" Still shocked by the luxurious appearance of the place, Ginny asked her new friend, Astoria, who was beside her. "From what my sister said, each common room is unique in its own way, but only Slytherin's is this rich. We have individual or double rooms if two people want to share. In Gryffindor, you have to share the room with 4 or 5 other girls," Astoria replied in a whisper, her tone full of pride for Slytherin. Mentioning Gryffindor, Astoria herself felt a shiver run down her spine. Just thinking about sharing her own room with other people without a hint of privacy left a rich girl like her very uncomfortable. Although she felt she wouldn't be too bothered by sharing a room with other girls, Ginny still nodded while continuing to look around the common room with great curiosity. Her gaze finally fell upon 2 chairs that resembled thrones next to the fireplace. Something that the new students also looked at with curiosity, after all, were 2 thrones, even for the descendants of minor noble houses. It was something they had never seen before. Marcus Flint, seeing the looks from the new boys and girls, smiled and proudly introduced, "These are the seats of Lord Asterion Black and his fiancée, Lady Daphne Greengrass." He seemed so proud that one might think he was talking about himself. The name of Asterion filled all the descendants of the minor noble houses with admiration and envy. After all, it was the name of the war hero who defeated the most evil wizard ever to set foot in Britain. Hearing her sister's name, Astoria couldn't help but look with envy at the silver throne beside the black throne. Every girl was vain and very proud, always wanting to be the center of attention. She was no different in that regard, but Astoria knew she could never surpass her sister's popularity. Clarissa Higgs, the female Slytherin monitor, spoke at this moment, looking at the 13-year-old girls. "Girls can enter the boys' dormitory, but boys cannot enter the girls' dormitory, so no bringing boys into the girls' dormitory." "Why would we bring boys into the girls' dormitory?" Ginny asked, confused by the rather specific rule. Beside her, Astoria looked speechlessly at the innocent red-headed teenager. "Isn't it obvious?" "What's obvious?" Ginny asked, genuinely confused, looking at Astoria. Seeing those innocent eyes, Astoria was at a loss for words. Had her mother not talked to her about these things? Though surprised, Astoria didn't answer. She didn't want to tarnish the girl's innocence but thought it would be amusing to see her reactions when she found out about these things. When everyone was about to head to their respective dormitories, Asterion's voice drew everyone's attention. "Marcus, Clarissa. Miss Riddle will stay with me for a moment." Asterion, who had just arrived in the common room, looked at the girl with black hair and red eyes. Marcus and Clarissa weren't surprised by Asterion's arrival. It was obvious given Ophelia's appearance that this would happen. Looking at Ophelia, who didn't object, Marcus and Clarissa nodded and led the new students to the dormitories. Astoria and Ginny looked at their friend with concern for a second but followed Clarissa to their rooms. Observing the boy sitting on the black throne by the fireplace, Ophelia's crimson eyes met his ruby ones. The notable resemblance between them had not escaped her since the moment she laid eyes on him. "Miss Riddle." His voice, though calm, was as confused as she felt in this strange moment. Even though she was new to this world that had just opened its doors to her, Ophelia knew the identity of the handsome boy in front of her. Asterion Black. There were as many rumors about him as mushrooms sprouting after rain. A powerful special grade wizard, though she didn't fully understand what that meant, she knew the young man before her was someone powerful in this magical world. And for some reason, given how similar they looked, this powerful figure had some blood relation to her, bringing conflicting feelings to the teenager's mind. Growing up alone for 13 years in a wealthy orphanage, believing she was alone in the world, it was a surprise to know she had some relative. This brought mixed feelings of joy and fear to her heart. Joy at knowing she wasn't alone and fear that it was just a coincidence they looked so alike. "Believe me, I am more surprised than you are." Noticing the negative emotions growing within the girl as she looked at him, Asterion spoke calmly, waking her from her thoughts. "Your appearance indicates that we are related, of that I have no doubt. This leads me to know who your parents are." Asterion spoke calmly, looking at the very nervous girl. The girl seemed to relax with his words and looked at him with obvious joy, and probably many questions on her mind. "I grew up in a very wealthy orphanage in West Yorkshire. I don't know who my parents are, but the headmaster of the orphanage said he found me in a basket on a winter night with a note bearing my name." Ophelia spoke each word without hesitation, her voice much happier as she looked at Asterion with a bright gaze. Their similar appearances made her feel an almost instant connection, knowing they were related. A wealthy orphanage? Does such a thing exist anywhere? Voldemort probably created a false orphanage to raise his own daughter in secret, something ironic given that he was also raised in an orphanage. Asterion thought, looking strangely at the girl. Observing her confident and cheerful aura, he confirmed his thoughts. Orphans usually don't possess much of that while growing up, not only due to the bullying they suffer but also due to the less than luxurious conditions given the number of children an orphanage raises. "Tell me about your childhood." Asterion crossed his legs and placed his hands on his knees. Any information about her would be useful in determining some questions in his mind. Chapter 116, Doubts. 1. Watching Ophelia practically bouncing with joy as she headed towards the girls' dormitory, Asterion narrowed his eyes and displayed a thoughtful expression. Throughout the entire conversation he had with the girl, he had been looking for any sign of pretense or lies on her part. After all, she was Voldemort's daughter, a man who had raised her in secret, and he didn't want to risk being stabbed in the back when he least expected it. Asterion had orchestrated Voldemort's own downfall. It would be poetically ironic if the daughter of the man he had killed did something similar to him. That was an experience he definitely did not want to have in his life. But if Ophelia had been pretending to be someone else the whole time during their conversation, Asterion assumed she should have gone to the United States, where she would have made a great career as an actress. She would definitely win a golden Oscar statue. Raising a hand to his forehead, Asterion couldn't help but think how things got more complicated when his family was involved. He couldn't simply kill Ophelia, not when she was possibly Bellatrix's daughter. Although Asterion didn't doubt for a second that Bellatrix would agree to kill Ophelia if he ordered it. His cousin was a fanatic lunatic who placed him on a pedestal on the same level as God. For a moment, Asterion felt a bit sorry for Ophelia. The girl didn't yet know that both her parents were, in a way, crazy in their own ways, especially her mother, who was completely insane. Suddenly, Asterion's shadow rippled, and a small dog with hundreds of eyes emerged from it, jumping into his lap. It rubbed against him affectionately while looking at him with its many eyes. A hint of amusement flashed in Asterion's eyes as he slowly petted his faithful companion. Holding Baskerville in his arms, Asterion rose from his seat and headed towards the boys' dormitory. He needed a drink to relax a bit. In his room, Asterion was shirtless, sitting in his armchair, holding a glass of whiskey with ice. Curiously, he didn't like magical drinks full of bubbles and too much sparkle. He preferred Muggle alcoholic beverages. They were not only tastier but also much easier to obtain. Baskerville lay next to the armchair, its hundreds of eyes roaming the room, ready to ensure its master's safety at any moment. Suddenly, the door to the room opened, and Daphne entered, dressed in classic Slytherin attire. A green skirt, a white blouse with the Slytherin crest, and a green tie. Technically, the doors to all the rooms at Hogwarts were magically protected with powerful spells. Only the owners had permission to open and close them, something Asterion had given to Daphne. Seeing her fiancé shirtless and drinking slowly in the armchair, Daphne's eyes wandered first over his abdomen, and her gaze slowly rose. She approached with quick steps and sat on the armrest of the chair, looking at her fiancé with a smile on her lips. "So, what did you want to tell me?" she asked in a calm voice, her eyes shining with curiosity. Rolling his eyes, Asterion pulled Daphne into his arms, making her sit on his lap facing him. Holding her waist firmly, he kissed her chin while locking eyes with her. "Apparently, your father never told you Voldemort's real name," he said between the kisses he placed on her neck and face, leaving slightly red marks on her skin with his actions. His hands sank even deeper into the flesh of her waist. Daphne only let out a muffled sound, agreeing with his words, her eyes closed, enjoying the gentle caresses on her skin. She moved her neck to the side, giving him more space to do as he pleased. Daphne could imagine that the hickeys and kisses would leave marks on her skin the next morning. Although it would be a bit embarrassing to be seen with something like this, it would be interesting to see Rose's face. Before assuming his name as Voldemort, he was known as Tom Marvolo Riddle. The son of Merope Gaunt and Tom Riddle, a muggle whom Merope fell in love with and used some questionable means to make him fall in love with her, Asterion said, looking into Daphne's eyes. He could see her face was slightly red, and she was breathing heavily. The desire in her eyes was as clear as knowing the sun would rise the next day. Daphne's desire-filled eyes widened, recalling Ophelia's surname. She quickly connected the dots and understood the core of the matter. Remembering the girl's appearance, the image of Bellatrix came to her mind. After all, she was the only woman from the House of Black who had been with Voldemort during his reign 13 years ago. Bellatrix and Voldemort, Daphne murmured to herself, looking at Asterion with curiosity. Asterion nodded and claimed Daphne's lips in an enveloping kiss. Daphne's thoughts almost immediately focused on Asterion, feeling the touch of his lips. She set aside any shocking news like this and fully surrendered to the kiss. She wrapped her arms around his neck and gently ground her hips on his lap. She could feel something hard growing beneath her, and it made her happy. At least she was attractive in his eyes. Asterion, I think I'm ready. Breaking the kiss, Daphne, who was extremely close to Asterion's lips, whispered breathlessly, her eyes burning with desire. Asterion nodded and caught his breath from the prolonged kiss. How about I prepare a special night for us? Daphne felt her heart submerge in an ocean of sweetness hearing that. Any other man would have jumped at her after hearing her previous words, but her fiancé wanted to prepare a special night for her. This only made the love she felt for him grow even more, if that was possible in her mind. No, let me prepare our night. If I leave it to you, you might decorate the entire mansion with silly flowers. Letting out a low laugh, Daphne smiled and spoke, pressing her forehead against his. Thinking about the idea, Daphne couldn't help but laugh again as her hands caressed his visibly defined chest. No matter how much she touched, she never got tired of those beautiful muscles. Asterion rolled his eyes at her words. He wouldn't do something as tacky as putting flowers on the bed. He was a much simpler and more elegant man. A candle at dinner was enough in his eyes. But Asterion didn't retort Daphne's words at that moment, not when she returned to kissing him again with even greater intensity. Honestly, he admired his own self-control, otherwise, he would already be in bed with Daphne, making her a real woman at this moment. New novel. I'm writing an original novel. If you're curious, take a look, and if you like it, add it to your library. I'm the Prince of Hell. Synopsis. It's been almost 16 years since Lucifer disappeared, leaving his throne vacant. Hell has long since plunged into civil war. 7 princes and 4 infernal dukes, along with their 72 infernal legions, battle to occupy the abyssal throne of Hell in a bloody and horrific war. Meanwhile, in the human world, Daemon Morningstar, a 15-year-old with the gift of seeing souls and infernal beings, receives an invitation to attend the mysterious boarding school in Oregon, in the city of New Eden. Unbeknownst to him, Daemon will become entangled in a chain of events that will lead him to discover the truth behind his lineage and, consequently, a path that will take him straight to his rightful place. The Abyssal Throne of Hell. If you're wondering why I didn't post it on my account, know that the idiot author forgot he was logged into another account and only realized it after requesting the contract. Chapter 117, Humbug. 1. Ginny was surprised that she was sharing a room with Ophelia, but she didn't complain. On the contrary, she was very happy to have someone in the room with her. It was her first time living alone in an unfamiliar place, and she felt it would be difficult to sleep alone. Looking at the room that could only be worthy of a princess from the stories she had read, Ginny gasped with happiness. The entire room was decorated with beautiful white wallpaper with gold accents, a canopy bed with green sheets, a lovely dresser with snakes carved into the wood, and an absolutely wonderful wardrobe. Thinking of her room at home and looking at the room before her, Ginny let go of any reservations about not going to Gryffindor. Even if her mother kicked her out of the house, she would never leave this room. Jumping onto the bed, Ginny looked at the smile on Ophelia's face on the bed next to her and asked curiously. "You seem so happy, Ophelia." Ophelia laughed and played with her hair, twirling it around her finger. She turned her gaze to her new friend and replied with a smile. "Asterion and I are relatives." Ginny stopped jumping on the bed and went to her friend's bed extremely quickly, her eyes shining with curiosity and admiration. "Amazing! You're related to the most famous wizard in Britain." Ophelia felt her cheeks warm at Ginny's words. She also thought she was dreaming and that all this was a dream, but remembering the conversation she had, her lips curved into a very happy smile. "Tell me everything," Ginny said excitedly, all her shyness from the entrance ceremony completely gone. The next day. Defense against the dark arts classroom. Looking at Gilderoy Lockhart wearing a green suit and smiling brightly at the students from behind a desk, Asterion again showed a look of disgust on his face and didn't hide his animosity. The man was a fraud from head to toe. His very existence insulted the sacred profession of teaching. "You don't seem to like Professor Lockhart, Asti." Looking at the expression of disgust on Asterion's face, Tracy asked in a low tone from the back row of seats in the classroom. "He's a complete fraud, probably never faced a cursed spirit in his life, and wants to teach about defending against a dark wizard." Asterion replied, snorting coldly, his red eyes falling on Lockhart, who shuddered for some reason. Daphne, Tracy, Theodore, and Blaise were surprised. It was the first time they had seen Asterion dislike someone so much. And from his tone, they detected even disgust and disdain. "Are you saying the deeds in his books are fake?" Tracy asked, her voice lower than usual, her eyes wide with incredulity. As a fan of Gilderoy, Asterion's words were nothing short of heresy to her. The man is a level 3 wizard. Do you think someone like that can fight 5 vampires and come out alive? Older vampires are as fast as bullets from a muggle gun. Besides, look up his academic records in the library, and you'll see that the man was talented in memory charms. Asterion asked, sarcasm dripping from his voice. Tracy was completely petrified. She didn't want to believe his words, but Asterion was someone she truly respected. She didn't think he would have animosity towards someone without reason. But Gilderoy's next words completely shattered the hope that it was just a mistake on Asterion's part. "Dear students, today we will start with a test." "A very important test," Lockhart said, and with a wave of his wand, several sheets flew across the room and landed in front of each student. "A test about me," he said, showing his impeccably white teeth. "Whoever gets all the questions right will receive a personal autograph from me." Looking at the questions on the sheet, Tracy's eyes went lifeless. Even as a fan, she still had enough sense to understand that these ridiculous questions were nothing more than to inflate the professor's ego. Remembering the hours she spent reading Lockhart's books, Tracy clenched her fists tightly and glared furiously at the fraud. Taking the sheet, Asterion simply used a bit of magical energy and made the page combust, turning it into ashes in a second. The smell of burning made Lockhart's eyes fall on Asterion. Seeing the ashes on the desk, he understood what had happened, and when he was about to reprimand the student with a charismatic laugh, he felt a shiver run down his spine. Faced with those red eyes, Lockhart swallowed hard and showed a stiff smile to the young man with red eyes whom he finally recognized. Wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief he took from the upper pocket of his suit, he selectively ignored Asterion and continued teaching. Seeing Lockhart do nothing against him, Asterion showed a disappointed look. He was about to demonstrate how to really kill a vampire so Lockhart could learn personally. Unfortunately, the man recognized him before he could do anything. I bought all these stupid books at the beginning of the year because of him. Now I'm going to burn them all when I get back to my room, Tracy said, gritting her teeth. The pain of spending so much money on books from a charlatan caused a pang in the heart of the teenager who believed in her idol. As the saying goes, never meet your idols, or you might be disappointed. Don't worry, at least we have Asterion's private lessons. Otherwise, we'd be just like the other houses stuck learning from Quirinus and now, Lockhart, Daphne reassured her friend, hugging her arm. Tracy's face brightened considerably upon hearing this. Indeed, future classes with Lockhart would be a joke compared to Asterion's, a special grade wizard. For other houses, having private lessons with Asterion was something they could only dream of. But for Slytherin, it wasn't an unreal dream. They had one lesson a week with a true special grade wizard. Oh, looks like we have a celebrity in our class, the girl who survived. Lockhart looked at the girl with the most striking hair in his classroom and spoke loudly. The smile on Rose's face stiffened upon hearing the new professor's words. With Asterion killing Voldemort, that title was almost never associated with her anymore. And she was more than happy for that to be the case. She hated the fame, especially fame she hadn't earned but rather inherited from her parents, earned with their own lives. Miss Potter. Can you tell me the answer to question number 15? Lockhart asked confidently, expecting Rose to surely know the answer. Looking at question number 15 on the sheet, Rose's lips twisted in an unusual manner. 15. What is Gilderoy Lockhart's birthday? Answer. How on earth would she know the birthday of someone she had never met? Nevertheless, Rose still responded with a mischievous smile. I don't know, Professor. I didn't meet you until the day of the new student ceremony. When Rose's voice ceased, silence spread throughout the classroom. Lockhart's bright smile stiffened, unable to believe his eyes. How could someone not know his birthday? Then, there were some stifled laughs. Many students tried their best not to laugh, but it was inevitable, as one couldn't take it anymore, the others followed suit. As they laughed, Lockhart felt his own cheeks burn with embarrassment. That was a funny joke, Miss Potter, Lockhart said with a forced smile, changing the subject quickly. Let's continue the lesson. Chapter 118 Ophelia's Mother, 1, Cousin, you never told me about my parents. Sitting in the armchair with a book in his hands, Asterion heard Ophelia's question. They were both in his room, a privilege only Daphne had previously enjoyed. Shifting his attention from the book and looking at the girl in front of him, Asterion blinked a few times, thinking, and then responded calmly, What do you want to know about them? Even though Ophelia knew the truth about her father's death and might start hating him because of it, Asterion really didn't care. He had killed Voldemort. Would he be afraid of a 13-year-old girl who had just entered the magical world? However, even without those consequences, he still would have told Ophelia the truth. She had the right to know who her real parents were. He had no way to prevent that. Lying about who Ophelia's parents were had never crossed Asterion's mind. It was so low that he never considered the idea. Who are they, and are they still alive? Ophelia spoke with a slightly trembling voice. She was anxious and scared. On one hand, she wanted her parents to be dead because it meant they hadn't abandoned her, but on the other, she wanted them to be alive so she could ask why they had left her. Looking into her eyes, which held a mixture of emotions, Asterion answered, "Although your lineage has not been determined with certainty, your possible father is dead." Asterion saw Ophelia's face show a sad expression and couldn't help but think that Ophelia was probably the only person to mourn Voldemort's death, even though she didn't yet know who her father really was. "Your possible mother is Bellatrix Black, my cousin." Asterion observed the sadness on the girl's face disappear almost instantly. "Bellatrix Black." Ophelia murmured repeatedly, her eyes growing brighter and more excited each time she said the name, finding it more beautiful in her mind. Asterion looked at the girl lost in thought and shook his head. He really wanted to know if Ophelia could ignore her own morals and love Bellatrix. At the same time, Asterion was absolutely certain that Bellatrix would not be a good mother. He even assumed that Bellatrix never wanted to have children in the first place. He could imagine how Bellatrix would react when she saw Ophelia. Seeing Ophelia all excited and joyful, knowing she had a mother still alive, Asterion didn't know how long this excitement and joy would last. If he were in her place, he might love Bellatrix regardless of her crimes and madness, but he didn't know if Ophelia could do something similar. Hogwarts Library. Ginny, wearing Slytherin robes, sat at the table with her two friends, Astoria and Ophelia. The three had been practically inseparable during this first month. "The other magic schools will arrive at Hogwarts tomorrow," Ginny heard Astoria whisper. She could sense her friend's excitement, not that she wasn't excited herself. Just imagining participating in such a big event made the red-haired girl's lips curl into a happy smile. At the same time, she couldn't help but reflect on her experiences this past month in Slytherin. It was totally different from what she had imagined. There were no fights, and if there were any, they were resolved through duels. She learned that in Slytherin, the strongest were the most respected. This was made very clear to her. It didn't matter if you were right or wrong, defeating your opponent was what mattered most. This made her uncomfortable for a while, respecting the strong and using the weak felt wrong to her. It took her some time to get used to this, but after a month, with the help of Astoria and her friends, she adapted to Slytherin's way of thinking. She even thought that this ideology was correct. This wasn't a kind world, and kind people died early. Another thing she was extremely grateful for in Slytherin was having private lessons with a special grade wizard. If she were to tell her other friends in other houses, they would definitely die of envy. Even having only 3 private lessons this month, she felt at least 30% stronger than when she started at Hogwarts. Her control over her magic had reached a very good level, and she received many compliments from Professor Flitwick because of it. In short, she was loving her stay in Slytherin. She had everything: luxury, privileges, and even power, something she never imagined she would have. Especially with her older brothers supporting her, although Ron had made it clear that she was a traitor. But Ron had been an idiot long before that, and she wasn't surprised by his childish attitude. "Look at Ophelia's silly smile, it looks like she found a boyfriend." Astoria teased her friend, seeing the dreamy smile on Ophelia's lips. Ginny blushed at the words but also looked at her friend with curiosity. Ophelia's cheeks warmed hearing Astoria's words. She looked at her friend angrily and replied in a low tone, "I'm not dating, Astoria." "That I know, you don't know how to use your feminine charm. Which boy would want a girl who doesn't care about her appearance?" Astoria tossed her long golden hair and replied with an arrogant tone, which naturally made Ophelia grit her teeth in frustration. Humph. Ophelia just huffed coldly and responded, I'm not going to argue with you, princess, but I'm smiling because my cousin finally told me my mother's name. The smile on her face showed how happy she was at that moment. The arrogant smile on Astoria's face disappeared, and she congratulated her friend sincerely. Congratulations, Ophelia. She knew how much Ophelia wanted to know her parents. What's her name? Ginny asked curiously. Bellatrix Black. Ophelia said, not noticing that Astoria's and Ginny's eyes widened in total disbelief. Ophelia continued talking, oblivious to her friend's expressions. I tried to find a Hogwarts yearbook with some information about her when she studied here, but I haven't found anything so far. Astoria and Ginny exchanged looks, recognizing the same thought in each other's eyes. We mustn't let Ophelia know the truth about Bellatrix. They knew that if their friend discovered the truth about her mother, she would probably be devastated. After all, finding out that your mother was a serial killer and a crazy dark witch was not exactly great news. I don't think the yearbook is in the library. It must be kept in a more restricted place, like the headmaster's office, Astoria said calmly, subtly trying to shift the search to a place Ophelia couldn't access. Ophelia's face fell slightly upon hearing this. She knew that if it was in Dumbledore's office, it would be extremely difficult to access the yearbook to learn more about her mother. Still, I'll look a bit more in the library, Ophelia said, sighing at the end. Her expression became resolute as she stood up from the chair and resumed searching the vast Hogwarts library. Seeing this, Astoria and Ginny exchanged glances and followed Ophelia without hesitation. They prayed to Merlin that there wasn't a copy of the Hogwarts yearbook in the library, otherwise, Ophelia would likely leave the place heartbroken. Chapter 119 I decided to seduce Daphne. 1. Gryffindor, Girls' Dormitory. Lying on her stomach, Rose looked at Hermione changing and spoke in a low tone, Mione, I still haven't thought of a way to separate Asterion and Daphne. Pulling her skirt up to her waist, Hermione adjusted it and rolled her eyes at her best friend's words. It had been a month, and Rose was still thinking of a brilliant way to separate the King and Queen of Slytherin. I've already told you, it's impossible to separate those two, she replied, buttoning up her blouse and covering her white lace bra. Honestly, I don't see you being able to separate them. Picking up a brush and starting to comb her hair, Hermione looked at Rose through the reflection in the mirror, and answered in a resigned voice. Separate, separate, separate. Rose turned over and let her head hang off the edge of the bed, murmuring the word repeatedly, ignoring her best friend's pessimistic remarks. Images of Daphne and Asterion appeared in her mind. It wasn't once or twice that she found herself thinking about those two. Especially this past month, she used every moment her brain had to calculate a situation capable of separating them. But all the scenarios involved Daphne betraying Asterion, something she considered impossible and so low that Rose didn't want to orchestrate it. She definitely wouldn't stoop that low. At the same time, Rose couldn't help but reflect on what she felt for Asterion. They were definitely not feelings she should have for a cousin. For the first time, she understood why her ancestors were so incestuous. It seemed to be in her blood. Suddenly, a thought crossed her mind. If I can't beat them, why not join them? She would have a handsome and powerful boyfriend from an extremely influential family in England, as well as a beautiful and powerful girlfriend. The more she thought about it, the brighter her eyes became. She wouldn't lose anything if she thought about it carefully. On the contrary, she would gain a lot according to what she learned from Dumbledore. If this were a Chinese novel and Dumbledore knew Rose used his teachings for something like this, he would have spat blood seeing her date her faction's enemies. As for dating a girl, in her eyes, that wasn't a problem. She had a very open mind. Boys and girls had the same charm in her eyes. But Rose knew she couldn't start with Asterion, he would reject her immediately, and that wasn't good. So, she had to start with Daphne. Rose didn't believe she couldn't seduce that blonde snake. "Mione, I've decided." Rose got up from the bed and spoke loudly. "I'm going to seduce Daphne, and together, we'll make Asterion accept us both." Hermione, who was applying mascara to her eyelashes, was so shocked by Rose's words that she messed up, drawing a straight black line across her eyebrow and forehead. With wide eyes, Hermione turned and looked at her best friend in shock. "How in Merlin's name did you come to that conclusion?" Hermione approached Rose and grabbed her shoulders, shaking her back and forth as she shouted. Rose, being shaken by Hermione, just laughed and responded with an arrogant look. "Because I'm incredibly smart." Hermione simply rolled her eyes at Rose's shameless words. She let go of the white-haired girl and sighed, feeling a headache coming on. "Didn't you hate Daphne Greengrass? And didn't you tell me you also liked girls?" Hermione asked curiously, her eyes looking at her best friend with a smile. "Well, hate is a strong word. I felt, and still feel, jealous of her for being with Asterion, but I don't hate her. She seems like a really nice person, almost like a true queen." Rose replied, falling back onto the bed. Hermione lay down beside her. "As for liking girls, I think I just discovered it recently. I found myself looking at other girls quite often." Rose held Hermione's hand and answered with a somewhat emotional voice. Hermione couldn't help but look at Rose with admiration. If it were her, she wouldn't have the courage to say she liked girls so easily, especially in the magical society where the birth rate is already naturally low. Same-sex relationships were definitely not approved of or well regarded in the eyes of most wizards and witches. "What will you do if Daphne doesn't like girls too?" Hermione interlaced her fingers with Rose's and asked curiously. "She does. I caught her looking at my butt once or twice," Rose said with a smug tone. She obviously saw that Daphne found her very attractive, even if it was just physical attraction. Both she and Daphne appreciated the beauty of each other's bodies. There were no feelings involved and probably never would be in the future. Rose would likely see Daphne as a sister/wife in the future. "I'll root for you, but don't get hurt if it doesn't work out." Hermione kissed Rose's cheek and spoke in a gentle tone. "Thanks, Mione." Rose laughed arrogantly and hugged the brown-haired girl with joy. Hermione just laughed, and the two girls began to play on the bed amidst laughter. Daphne, walking through the corridors of Hogwarts, ignored the numerous discreet glances falling on her and walked with calm steps, her long hair flowing with her movements. But her steps stopped the next moment, her path blocked by another person, or rather, another teenager. Seeing those incredibly blue eyes, like stars shining in a blue sky, Daphne's eyes narrowed, and she smiled elegantly. "Lady Potter." Daphne greeted England's third special grade wizard with politeness and elegance. Whether intentionally or not, she tilted her head to the side, revealing her neck and the particularly obvious red marks on her fair skin. Rose's eyes first fell on Daphne's neck, her mind involuntarily imagining rather steamy scenes between Daphne and Asterion. Seeing Rose's lack of reaction, Daphne's eyes reflected her internal doubts. She expected a stronger reaction than just a calm look from Rose. But, looking at Rose and her red and gold clothing, Daphne had to admit something: Rose was incredibly beautiful. It was no wonder she was called the Queen of Gryffindor. "Any problem, Lady Potter?" Seeing Rose staring at her silently, Daphne asked, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear while smiling elegantly. Although she didn't know what was going on with Rose, she wouldn't show weakness in front of her romantic rival. Daphne couldn't imagine, not even in her wildest dreams, that Rose was currently thinking about how to seduce her and then make her accept seducing Asterion together. "It's nothing, see you later, Daphne." Rose said nothing more, smiling as she walked past a completely confused Daphne. Daphne turned and looked at Rose's back with doubt, but her eyes unconsciously lowered, observing her skirt swaying purposefully with the white-haired girl's movements. The eldest daughter of the Greengrass house shook her head, pushing those intrusive thoughts away, and continued walking. "Strange," Daphne murmured to herself, feeling that the whole encounter with Rose was strange, but stranger than usual. Chapter 120 Arrival of the 12 Schools of Witchcraft and Wizardry. 1. Did something happen, Daph? Seeing the strange expression on Daphne's face as she ate at the Slytherin table, Asterion asked curiously. "It's nothing." Daphne shook her head, not mentioning Rose's odd behavior. She had thought about her encounter with Rose all night and realized that Rose was deliberately trying to get her attention. This made the Slytherin queen's lips twitch unnaturally. An absurd idea crossed her mind: was Rose seducing her? But she dismissed that thought as soon as it appeared. The idea was so absurd that she couldn't even imagine it, but no matter how she looked at it, Rose seemed to be seducing her. This left her with so many questions that it affected her current behavior. Seeing Daphne like this, Asterion remained silent and didn't ask what was bothering her. Everyone has secrets, even couples. Privacy was necessary for a healthy marriage in the future. As long as it didn't affect their marriage, Asterion couldn't be bothered to ask about it. But Daphne's next words surprised Asterion. "We need to talk about something later," she said, her tone a whisper so only the two of them could hear. Although he didn't know why she was being so secretive, Asterion nodded and went back to eating. The 12 schools of magic and wizardry arrived at Hogwarts today. "I can't wait to see their faces when they see Hogwarts," Tracy, sitting next to Theodore, said excitedly. Her voice didn't hide the presumption and pride of being a student at one of the top 3 schools of magic and wizardry in the world. But this arrogance and presumption weren't exclusive to Tracy, it was something all the students, regardless of their house, shared. They all took pride in being Hogwarts students. "I went to the Quidditch stadium, and it was full of reporters from all over the world waiting for the arrival of all 12 magical schools," Theodore added after Tracy, his expression somewhat sad. Even though he knew he couldn't have been chosen to represent Slytherin, he still tried and failed miserably to gather the support of Slytherin members. Seeing his friend's desolate expression, Blaise rolled his eyes. Although he also wanted to be Slytherin's representative, he spared himself the humiliation of being rejected by everyone, something Theodore achieved gloriously. "But one thing is obvious to everyone at Hogwarts," Tracy suddenly said, drawing everyone's attention at the table. She raised her arm and clenched her fist, shouting, "Hogwarts will win." What followed was, naturally, all the students in the Great Hall cheering excitedly. Hogwarts will win. Regardless of their house, everyone shouted in unison. This was the one thing everyone agreed on, no matter how many enemies they had, Hogwarts would win. The professors at the head table merely nodded in satisfaction at the scene. It was truly heartwarming to see everyone united in their determination to win. Dumbledore also had a smile on his lips as he stroked his long white beard. Previously, he had been hesitant to hold such a large tournament at Hogwarts, preferring the traditional Triwizard Tournament, but seeing the scene before him, he realized how wrong he had been. The children in front of him were not old like him, they had a desire to prove themselves to the whole world. I can already predict that things will be noisy for a long time, Daphne whispered with a smile, seeing all the Slytherins excited regardless of their age. That's good. Let everyone relax for a while, they deserve it, Asterion said calmly beside her, his red eyes looking around the Great Hall with a deep gaze. Honestly, he was expecting many things to happen in this tournament. He didn't think Grindelwald would stay away from the fun he himself caused. The man would probably make a spectacular entrance. Asterion couldn't deny that he was excited, so much so that his lips curled into a cold smile. Suddenly, he felt a finger poke his face. Showing a confused expression, Asterion looked at Daphne with doubt. "You look like a villain smiling like that," Daphne said with an amused smile and a playful look in her eyes. Asterion rolled his eyes at her words and turned his head away, not wanting to look at his fiancée's amused expression. Helping Asterion button his shirt, Daphne smiled. She enjoyed these moments, even if they didn't matter much, it was something she valued because it meant Asterion trusted her. "What did you want to talk about?" Asterion asked, looking directly into Daphne's blue eyes. He could see a slight hesitation in her gaze, but she spoke up in the end. "Rose is seducing me." Asterion's lips twitched unnaturally at his fiancée's words, and even he couldn't help but widen his eyes slightly at her shocking statement. Frowning, he wrapped his arms around Daphne's waist and rested his forehead against hers, their noses touching and their eyes meeting intensely. "If you're thinking of canceling our wedding to be with Rose, you won't succeed. You are mine forever," Asterion said each word with a determination and possessiveness almost palpable in the air. His gaze was so intense that Daphne felt like her skin was burning. Daphne felt a weakness in her legs and nearly jumped into Asterion's arms upon hearing his words. His possessiveness, anger, and determination didn't bother her in the slightest. On the contrary, they made her so happy she could be floating on cloud 9. "Canceling our engagement never crossed my mind, Asterion. I love you." Wrapping her legs around his body, Daphne felt his hands on her butt, preventing her from falling to the floor. She entwined her arms around his neck and looked directly into his eyes. Carrying Daphne to the bed, Asterion sat down and placed Daphne on his lap, facing him. "Explain while I punish you a little for making me angry," Asterion said calmly, sliding his hand under her skirt. Feeling his touch, Daphne stiffened and breathed heavily, using his body for support. She rested her head on his shoulder while looking directly at her fiancé. "At least Rose finds me attractive," Daphne murmured, biting her lips to stifle the embarrassing sounds she never thought she would make. Her body trembled occasionally, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Asterion didn't expect Rose to be interested in women, but after thinking for a moment, he didn't care what his cousin did with her life. He was still pondering what Daphne was getting at with this topic. However, the idea of Rose flirting with Daphne didn't please him. Because of this, his fingers, already wet under her skirt, quickened their pace. Daphne couldn't hold back a sweet and sensual moan as her tearful eyes gazed at Asterion with a pleading look. Breathing heavily, Daphne spoke in a soft and melodious voice. I was thinking about us. Since she likes both me and you, why not take the opportunity? If you marry her too, we'll control all of England without any conflict. Daphne finally revealed her purpose and suddenly shuddered from head to toe. Her toes curled, and she briefly lifted her hips before collapsing weakly into Asterion's arms. Ah ha. Breathing heavily, Daphne looked at Asterion with a spoiled and desire-filled gaze. Darling, she said in a sweet and exhausted voice. Asterion withdrew his completely wet hand from under her skirt and licked it while looking deeply at Daphne. Daphne only felt her cheeks heat up like never before at the sight, especially with him licking her juices as if tasting a delicacy. I will think about your proposal, my queen, but I think we need a bath, Asterion said with a smile. Before Daphne could respond, he scooped her up in his arms and walked to the private bathroom in his room. At the same time, he was very pleased that Daphne was thinking about him and their future, regardless of her own feelings. He knew it wasn't an easy decision to want to share her husband with another woman. Chapter 121 Arrival of the 12 Schools of Witchcraft and Wizardry. 2. At 6:00 p.m., the Quidditch Stadium was completely packed, not only with foreign reporters but also with Hogwarts students. The stadium was fully illuminated. Despite it being night, there wasn't a single shadow. In the center of the stadium, on the green grass, a platform had been erected, and all the professors, the Hogwarts Council, senators, and lords from the clock tower were present. As the first wizard marshal of the clock tower, Albus Dumbledore stood at the forefront. His mere presence drew surprised gasps from the reporters. After all, it was rare for the most powerful wizard in the world to make a public appearance. Next to Dumbledore, all 12 ministers and the President of Magic stood side by side. Regardless of who they were, everyone was trying to curry favor with the man. After all, he was the only person known to have fought Grindelwald and had recently battled the Dark Lord just months ago. Dumbledore, accustomed to the fame, only conversed kindly with the ministers and presidents. At the same time, he received numerous insider informations, especially concerning the movements of his former lover and rival. What in Merlin's name are you planning, Gellert? Dumbledore thought, looking thoughtfully at Asterion among the other lords. Perhaps sensing his gaze, young Asterion turned to look at him and gave him a gracious smile. Dumbledore returned the smile and continued speaking with the ministers of magic and the president of Macusa. In the stands, Tracy looked suspiciously at her friend. You took a long time. Where were you? She asked curiously, her brown eyes scanning up and down, noticing something unusual about her best friend. Did she seem lighter and more cheerful? Daphne felt her cheeks heat up, remembering the bath she had shared with Asterion. It was the first time she had seen a man completely naked. Just thinking that that Greek god would be hers for her entire life made her smile. Seeing the silly grin on Daphne's lips, Tracy's eyes lit up. Daphne only showed that look when she was with Asterion. Connecting the dots in her mind, she looked at her best friend and whispered. What did you two do, and how far did you go? She asked, her eyes shining with a touch of amusement and teasing. He made me come, and we bathed together, Daphne whispered back, despite her embarrassment. She bit her lips, remembering the previous events. The legendary bath scene. Tracy's eyes widened. In all the books she had read in her life, there was always a scene with the couple in the bathroom, the steamy glass, and many other things. She couldn't help but look at Daphne with envy. She couldn't wait to find a boyfriend herself. Unconsciously, her eyes fell on Blaise, who was calmly talking with Theodore. Tracy looked at Blaise and bit her lips, cursing softly. "Even a door could see my feelings, you idiot." Daphne noticed this and smiled. She looked at Tracy, then at Blaise, with a mischievous grin. As a good friend, she had the duty to help her friend get a boyfriend. Suddenly, loud, sharp pops echoed throughout the Quidditch stadium, causing silence to fall over the entire place. Asterion, who had been talking with Aurelius, turned to the front, where he saw numerous people apparating. They were all wearing quite beautiful uniforms, each bearing a crest with 4 magical animals surrounding the letter I. Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Leading the students was a black woman dressed in an elegant women's suit. She had short, curly hair and brown eyes behind a pair of golden glasses. Roxanne Morgan, headmistress of Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The woman was slightly pale from transporting so many students over such a great distance. Seeing the president of Makusa on the platform, she approached and greeted him respectfully. "President Thorne. I'm counting on you in this tournament, Headmistress Morgan." Benjamin nodded to her and spoke with a warm smile. He trusted the woman to bring back the trophy from this tournament. The president of Makusa then turned his gaze to the 19-year-old boy among the Ilvermorny students. The boy bore a striking resemblance to him. Michael Thorne, his son, whom he was very proud of. The boy had fully inherited his innate technique and his talent as a special grade wizard, though he was still far from reaching that level. With the arrival of Ilvermorny Academy, other schools began to appear on the field. Mahutokoro, Japan. Castelobruxo, Brazil. Academy of Magic and Witchcraft of Vienna, Austria. School of Magical Arts of the Black Forest, Germany. Institute of Magic and Witchcraft of Florence, Italy. Academy of Magical Arts of Olympus, Greece. School of Runes and Witchcraft of Lapland, Sweden. School of Magic and Witchcraft of Salamanca, Spain. Academy of Astrology and Nature of Shihuang, China. Hundreds of students from different magic and witchcraft schools stood side by side, wearing beautiful uniforms and exuding confidence in every gesture in front of the reporter's camera flashes in the stands. "Our rivals," Tracy said, looking challengingly at the hundreds of teenagers on the field. Daphne rolled her eyes at her friend's competitiveness and looked confusedly at the field. 2 schools were still missing, the ones from France and Russia. But she didn't have to wait long to see the other 2 of the world's top 3 schools. A massive ship broke through the clouds and descended from the sky, sailing through the air. The white sails bearing the crest of the Russian Imperial Eagle billowed in the wind, propelling the enormous ship forward. Seeing the astonished faces of everyone, the Russian Minister of Magic laughed loudly and stroked his tangled beard with a very proud look on his face. He glanced at the president of Makusa, not hiding his disdain and arrogance. Benjamin gritted his teeth and ignored his old rival. He knew that when it came to magical accumulation and heritage, the United States lagged behind numerous nations, but that wasn't America's fault. The country was very young compared to other magical nations. As everyone marveled at Durmstrang's arrival, they heard the flapping of wings and gaped in shock at the sight of 3 beautiful carriages pulled by numerous white Pegasi gracefully crossing the sky and elegantly landing on the field. "Damn, are we at a show to see who can make the best entrance?" Tracy heard numerous murmurs in the stands and couldn't help but complain aloud. Daphne nodded in agreement with her friend's words. Durmstrang and Beauxbatons certainly knew how to make a grand entrance at that moment. The arrival of the two magical schools overshadowed all the others. Chapter 122 Arrival of the 12 Schools of Witchcraft and Wizardry. 3. Dumbledore, seeing the spectacular arrival of both nations, simply laughed and clapped. He had to give credit to France and Russia for making such an impressive entrance. In the stands, the camera flashes resembled a sea of blinding lights. The thunderous arrival of the two nations heightened the audience's excitement to great heights. The doors of the carriages, pulled by white Pegasi, opened, and a dozen beautiful women in blue dresses and matching hats enchanted the male spectators, who cheered loudly. In particular, Fleur Delacour, with her exquisitely beautiful face and charming smile, successfully captured the attention of all the boys in the stands. After all the members of Beauxbatons had disembarked, an incredibly tall woman, even taller than Hagrid, gracefully descended from the carriage. Her black dress perfectly hugged her slender and beautiful body. Madame Maxime. Albus greeted the woman with an elegant and warm look. Albus, you look splendid in that outfit. Offering her hand, the headmistress of Beauxbatons, Olympe Maxime, subtly flirted with the most powerful man in the world. You are even more dazzling, Madame Maxime. Albus let out a happy laugh and kissed her hand while looking into her eyes. It seemed as if the man was flirting back. Always so charming, Albus. Maxime covered her mouth and laughed softly, giving Albus a very friendly pat on the shoulder. For a moment, Dumbledore's face showed a pained expression from the friendly pat on the shoulder, and he laughed along with the half-giant woman. Asterion, watching the scene, just rolled his eyes. The headmistress Maxime didn't know that the man she was flirting with predominantly preferred male companionship. And even if he did like women, Asterion couldn't imagine old Dumbledore sleeping with Maxime. She would probably crush him during the process. For some reason, this made Asterion find the scene quite amusing. While Albus and Maxime were conversing warmly, a wooden bridge was raised from the ship, linking the ship to the ground. Young wizards and witches dressed in classic black Russian clothing, holding wooden staffs, descended from the ship, all looking like very well-trained soldiers. After the young people in black had disembarked, a man dressed in classic white Russian clothing came down from the ship, his demeanor arrogant and cold. When the man saw Dumbledore, he walked over to him and embraced the pillar of the British magical community. Albus. Igor Karkaroff, headmaster of Durmstrang, spoke in a serious and hoarse voice. Igor. Albus greeted him amicably as well. Both smiled amicably. It hardly seemed as if they had been enemies in the First Wizarding War. Seeing all the foreign students lined up side by side, Dumbledore stepped forward with open arms and spoke, his voice reaching everyone in the stadium. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are here to celebrate a historic day that will be etched in the annals of our history. Seeing the audience filled with excitement at his words, Albus continued. 13 magical schools will be participating in the International Magic and Witchcraft Tournament. Young wizards and witches will compete against each other in a fierce tournament divided into 3 stages, which will remain secret for now. Albus laughed and spoke, his youthful, animated, and warm tone making everyone look at the most powerful man in the world with a very different gaze than before. Applause thundered loudly, and everyone looked at the man with admiration. Asterion clicked his tongue at this, noting how easily the man could make people like him, something Asterion himself would likely find challenging. Even the ministers of magic from other countries looked at the scene somewhat incredulously. If they had the same charisma as Dumbledore, they wouldn't have to worry about being re-elected every 4 years. To all those participating in the tournament, I wish you good luck and hope you all have fun. Hogwarts opens its doors to you. Dumbledore concluded his speech quickly, knowing that the children would be hungry after their journey, especially those from Durmstrang and Beauxbatons, who had flown to England. Although Hogwarts did not make a spectacular entrance, they didn't need to. The enormous castle on the hill was enough to enchant anyone. It seemed like a mythical castle with tall towers straight out of popular fairy tales. Around the castle, the magical energy was so dense and pulsated like a heart contracting and expanding, it seemed as if the castle was alive. The students from the other magical schools shared the same feeling after seeing the enormous castle on the hill. Incredible! Entering the Great Hall and seeing the spectacular starry ceiling, everyone was amazed by the sight. For a moment, they felt a bit envious of the Hogwarts students. Living in this medieval castle would be like stepping into a fairy tale they had always heard from their parents as children. Since it was impossible to place new tables in the Great Hall, the 12 magical schools had to sit together with the 4 houses of Hogwarts: Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff. But since there were no specific seating requirements for each school, all the students sat at the tables they liked the most. At the Gryffindor table, the boys look like a bunch of animals in heat, Hermione commented, seeing all the boys at the table staring at the prettiest girl from Beauxbatons. From what she had heard, she knew the young woman's identity: Fleur Delacour, daughter of the French Minister of Magic. Interesting, Rose said, biting into her toast and looking at Fleur with interest. To her eyes, the French girl unconsciously exuded a colorless and odorless scent, which, from what she observed, could influence the opposite sex in a very basic way. Rose assumed that someone older with this ability could control others using this scent very easily. There was almost no defense against something like this, as the human body would absorb the scent very easily through the pores of the skin. And seeing her appearance, Rose knew that Fleur was not at all happy with what was happening to her. Rose could understand. After all, no one wants to be surrounded by animals in heat looking at them as a simple piece of juicy meat. At the Slytherin table, seeing Blaze's gaze fixed on Fleur, Tracy's eyes became increasingly dangerous and cold. Under the table, she stomped on the Italian boy's foot with her high heel. Blaze, who was captivated by Fleur's appearance, suddenly hissed, feeling the sharp pain in his foot. "What in Merlin's name was that, Tracy?" Blaze took a deep breath, feeling his foot extremely painful, and complained loudly to the girl sitting in front of him. "You look like a dog in heat. I'm just making sure you don't tarnish Slytherin's image," Tracy huffed and replied venomously while glaring at the boy. Blaze wanted to refute her words, but seeing those increasingly cold brown eyes staring at him, he wisely chose to remain silent and ate in silence, with a very obvious bitterness in his expression. Asterion watched this and shook his head. He snapped his fingers, and Baskerville's influence expanded, covering the entire Slytherin table. The boys who had been staring at Fleur suddenly snapped out of their trance, feeling dazed. Remembering their embarrassing behavior in front of everyone, they all felt deep shame and lowered their heads in dismay. Fleur, who was at the Ravenclaw table, ignored all the excited glances directed at her and soon noticed the strange behavior of the Slytherin members. Seeing that the Slytherin members were no longer absorbed in her charm, Fleur's eyes sparkled as she wisely looked at Asterion. Suddenly, she noticed her sister, Gabrielle, leaving her side and walking towards the Slytherin table. This made Fleur's lips curl into an amused smile as she awaited the next scene. Chapter 123 Arrival of the 12 Schools of Witchcraft and Wizardry. 4. We meet again, Monsieur Black. Gabrielle approached where Asterion was sitting and spoke softly with her sweet and melodious voice. She was wearing the same blue Beauxbatons dress and had light makeup on her face, making her even more beautiful at that moment. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and smiled gracefully with a touch of shyness on her face. The passion on her face was so obvious that it made Daphne's face darken in an instant. She couldn't believe that someone could be more shameless than the heiress of House Parkinson. Lady Gabrielle. Asterion greeted the teenager with a calm look, though he felt Daphne's arm gripping his extremely tightly. May I sit next to Monsieur Black, madam? Gabrielle ignored the deadly glares she was receiving from Daphne and asked sweetly and innocently to Doria, who was sitting next to him. Daphne looked at Doria beside Asterion and warned her with her eyes that there would be consequences if she accepted. The poor Doria, finding herself caught in the fight, couldn't help but twist her lips abnormally. But before she could coldly refuse the French girl's proposal, a masculine voice saved her at the right moment. You can take my seat, Lady Delacour. Theodore spoke with an elegant and very handsome smile on his face, his expression clearly showing obvious passion. It was clear he had fallen for Gabrielle. Blaise looked at his friend incredulously and, without thinking twice, distanced himself from his longtime friend. He could see the immense fury in the eyes of the Slytherin queen. As for the betrayal? Sorry, survival comes first. Doria looked at Theodore with pity, knowing that the fool was practically dead given the fury she saw in Daphne's eyes. Thank you, monsieur. Gabrielle smiled beautifully at the boy she was about to use and discard as an object to achieve her goals and thanked him softly. Theodore just nodded repeatedly, feeling his cheeks burn at that beautiful smile. He felt he was seeing an adorable and pure angel. Is this what it feels like to fall in love? Theodore murmured to himself with a silly smile on his face. He selectively ignored his best friend's warning looks. A boy in love was stupider than a door. Sitting in Theodore's place, Gabrielle smiled gracefully at Daphne and leaned her elbows on the table. What do you recommend to eat? It's a bit cold, so a mushroom soup is quite suitable, Lady Delacour. Theodore suggested with barely concealed excitement on his face. Note: I was going to use licking dog, but I remembered this is a Western fanfic. In my country, this type of man who does everything to get a woman is called gatto. What is he called in your country? Gabrielle smiled at Theodore and ignored his suggestion, her beautiful crystal blue eyes fixed on Asterion. Feeling Daphne's nails digging into his arm, Asterion showed a bitter expression. Wasn't he being obvious enough that he didn't want to talk to the girl? As Theodore said, soup is suitable for this cold evening, Lady Delacour. Asterion finally spoke to the girl, his voice uniform and calm. Anyone could see he didn't want to converse. Thank you, Monsieur Black. Gabrielle obviously noticed the subtle rejection in his words. Although she knew that if she insisted, she could cause some annoyance to Asterion, she still didn't want to give up trying to find some common ground. But seeing his gaze becoming increasingly distant, she opted to stay quiet for now. Asterion sighed in relief when Gabrielle left him alone and focused on socializing at the Slytherin table. The teenager had incredible social skills. She was extroverted and fun, which made a great impression on the Slytherin members. Looking at Daphne, whose eyes were fixed on Gabrielle, Asterion felt a headache coming like a hurricane. The Great Hall seemed much more lively than it usually was. The Hogwarts students were full of curiosity about how classes worked in other countries. And so it went until dinner ended, when everyone got up and went to their respective dormitories. Professor McGonagall took charge of leading the foreign students and professors to a separate wing where the visitors were accommodated. The next day. In the library. That little bitch. Daphne gripped the book so hard that she crumpled the pages. She usually didn't swear, but when it came to Gabrielle Delacour, she found herself helpless against the girl with a quarter villa blood. The girl didn't hide her passion for Daphne's fiancé. A blind man could see that she liked Asterion. The worst part was seeing that little bitch gaining popularity in Slytherin, as if she wanted to take Daphne's place as the Slytherin queen. Daph, the book. Seeing the poor book being crumpled in Daphne's hands, Tracy whispered to her friend. The librarian could be scary when it came to books, and she didn't want to see that librarian, who had once dated Ophelia, become full of fury. Breathing deeply to calm herself, Daphne released the book and placed it on the table. She brought her hand to her forehead, rubbing it while displaying a cold and intimidating look. It wasn't once or twice that she found herself thinking about punching Gabrielle's beautiful face. Her sweet smile was especially irritating to her. Though I doubt Asterion could be seduced by that Marilyn Monroe wannabe, what do you plan to do? Tracy asked curiously. She really didn't see how Gabrielle could seduce the cold and arrogant Asterion Black. To her, Daphne's concern was unnecessary. You don't understand, Tracy. She challenged me, she wants what is mine. Daphne whispered, her eyes narrowing, a cold light reflecting in them. Tracy rolled her eyes at her friend's words. To her, Daphne was defending something that didn't need defending, unlike her, who had to keep an eye on Blaise all the time to make sure he didn't fall for Fleur's charms and become a lapdog like all the other boys at Hogwarts right now. It doesn't matter at the moment. Tonight, the tournament will officially start with the selection of our 4 representatives. Have you thought about who to vote for as Slytherin's representative? Tracy changed the subject, seeing that her friend was about to start talking about Gabrielle again. Her voice carried a touch of excitement. Although she knew it was impossible for her to be selected to represent Slytherin, hope was the last thing to die in someone. I'll vote for Asterion. Daphne said, shrugging with an indifferent look. But he can't participate, he's a special grade wizard. Tracy said in a surprised tone. I know, but I'll still vote for him. I don't trust anyone else to bring the trophy to Hogwarts. Daphne stretched comfortably and spoke, her voice full of confidence in her fiancé. Tracy rolled her eyes at her friend's words and returned to reading the book in her hands with seriousness. Chapter 124 Conspiracy in Progress, 1. In a Hogwarts room. Is everything ready, dear Robert? Veruca Buckthorn Snide, deputy director of a supposed organization called R, asked the naked man in bed as she dressed in her underwear again. She leaned over, displaying her nudity unabashedly while smiling with narrowed eyes forward. She could feel his greedy gaze, full of lust and hunger. Yes, everything is ready. Looking at the beautiful woman dressing in front of him, Robert crouched, a member of the secondary line of the Crouch family and a Hogwarts council member, licked his lips, remembering the previous night. This woman had done more unconventional things in bed with him than his wife had in 35 years of marriage. Robert couldn't help but shiver at the pleasure he had experienced earlier. Veruca, clad only in black lingerie, feeling the heated gaze upon her, smirked mischievously for a moment, but quickly returned to a sweet, gentle smile as she climbed onto the bed and sat on Robert's lap, facing him. "You were so powerful last night, Robert," Veruca said, stroking Robert's chest with an obvious expression of admiration, biting her lip and looking sensually at him. Her nails gradually left marks on his chest, and unknowingly, a drop of blood trickled down his skin. Seeing the drop of blood, Veruca's eyes narrowed and the smile on her lips widened. It was a lie of hers. The man had arrived in mere 5 minutes, maybe less. She was not counting with so much boredom that she was feeling in that moment. Robert did not care about this small injury and felt the pride in his chest could not be more contained at this time. "But look what they did to you." Veruca spoke with veiled indignation in her voice. "That old Crouch did not even pass the patriarchal mantle to you even after his stupid son died." With her words, Robert's originally smiling face grew dark. The noble and great house of Crouch reduced to a mere senator, not even becoming a lord. What a great injustice. Veruca continued, making Robert's face darker and darker. He gritted his teeth and remembered the look of contempt that Bartemius Crouch had given him when he asked to be his heir and future patriarch of the House of Crouch. His words still echoing in his mind. "Even if I die, be buried, and this mansion reduced to ashes, you will never be the patriarch of the House of Crouch, not you, a bastard of the secondary lineage who did not even inherit my house's innate technique. Get out and stay at Hogwarts as you always have. That's your only place where you can help my house, you filthy bastard." Bartemius's words still echoed in his mind over and over again, repeatedly, and each time they replayed, his expression became more fierce. "That old bastard, that damn clock tower, and fuck Asterion Black." Robert almost growled when he thought of Bartemius. His hands holding Veruca's waist unconsciously tightened, but the woman showed no sign of pain. On the contrary, she smiled gently, like a virtuous wife. Satisfied with his words, Veruca held Robert's face and looked at him with concern. "What is rightfully yours will be yours, dear Robert." Kissing his lips gently, she spoke in a tempting tone. Many share similar thoughts. The dissolution of the Ministry of Magic has caused much dissatisfaction for those who oppose change. Interests and profits were disrupted, causing significant damage to our beautiful country. And all for what? So that the great houses could remain in power, controlling this country as nothing more than puppets in the hands of the truly powerful. We must free our society from this tyranny hidden behind a false democracy. Veruca expressed everything she wanted to convey with each word, and each word made Robert's heart beat faster. Though not very intelligent, he understood what Veruca meant by these words. Coup d'état. Even influenced by Veruca, Robert's neurons were still functioning correctly. The fear of death outweighed his desire for power in his mind. "Albus Dumbledore and Asterion Black would kill us all if they found out. We cannot fight against the most powerful man in the world and one of the greatest geniuses ever to set foot in this country." Robert shook his head, denying this unreal proposal. But Veruca's next words made his eyes widen. "What if I told you we have a weapon capable of killing a special-grade wizard?" Veruca spoke enticingly, her voice like a demon tempting Robert to sin, and sin he did. The insatiable desire for power, the longing to be the new patriarch of the House of Crouch, even the Muggle War Marshal, made Robert's mind a complete mix of conflicting emotions. In the end, he surrendered to his own desires. "What are we going to do?" Robert asked, looking at Veruca with an extremely excited look. A smile bloomed on her lips, and although her eyes were kind, there was a profound sadism and madness hidden behind her gaze. Although the clock tower seems strong, right now it's like broken glass. The glue holding pieces together and preventing the vase from shattering completely are Albus Dumbledore and Asterion Black. Kissing his chest, Veruca looked at Robert with admiration and spoke as her hand moved down his flabby, fat abdomen, finally reaching his already hardened member. Though not nearly the largest she had ever slept with, it was decent, it served its purpose. "We just need to remove them, and all of England will want to return to what it was before. Where you will be the Minister of Magic who will lead our society to heights never before seen." Moving her hands slowly up and down, she whispered her warm breath on his neck. Robert's breathing quickened as he felt her movements, the image she described gradually painting itself in his mind, a smile appearing on his face. He wanted this, he wanted to be Minister of Magic, he wanted to leave a legacy admired by all future generations. Seeing the 50-year-old man showing a happy smile like a small child, Veruca's lips curved into a smirk. Men were so simple. That was the conclusion Veruca drew after manipulating countless men and sleeping with them. Just say what they wanted to hear and show a bit of charm, and they were like a pack of animals in heat, obeying her commands like mere domesticated dogs. Chapter 125 Conspiracy in Progress. 2. Watching the 50-year-old married man leave through the door with a reinvigorated and arrogant look, Veruca's lips couldn't help but curl into a mocking smile. She hadn't expected her mission to go so smoothly this time. Robert Crouch was a simple and cowardly man, but that was precisely why she had chosen him as bait. Besides, he was the only one with access to the item she was ordered to tamper with. Did he agree, Veruca? Completely naked, she turned to the wall where there was a mirror. In the mirror, she found the reflection of a very handsome, dark-skinned man with deep brown eyes. Even through the mirror, she could see the hidden lust in his gaze as he meticulously examined her body. As always, men were simple. Although Asterion seemed different in her eyes, she presumed the boy had not yet become a full-fledged man and had never slept with a woman. When he finally did become a man, he wouldn't look at her so coldly as before. "My lord." Without bothering to hide her nudity, she bowed elegantly, smiling with satisfaction upon seeing the lust in her superior's eyes. "I have gained access to the Goblet of Fire." The man in the mirror nodded, apparently very pleased with the successful completion of the mission. He himself hadn't expected the mission to go so smoothly. But it seemed he had overestimated the old men of the Hogwarts Council. "You know what to do," he said before disappearing from the mirror. Humming, Veruca walked over to a hanger, took a very thin, expensive red robe, and put it on. Looking at herself in the mirror, she walked towards the bathroom. She was going to clean herself and wash away all the disgusting traces that old man had left on her body. Asterion, unaware of the conspiracy creeping closer and of the many lesser noble houses secretly rebelling due to their dissatisfaction with his rule, remained unperturbed. It wasn't that he was unaware of the noble house's discontent at being sidelined, but he didn't care. Even if ants banded together to kill an elephant, they would fail. The reason was simple: the elephant would move when it felt threatened and would trample any ant in its path without caring or even noticing the ants it crushed. At this moment, Asterion was outside with his friends under a tree. Daphne, as always, was by his side. Under the blanket they were all sitting on, there was a basket filled with various foods. They were obviously having a picnic. Lockhart is a joke. I heard the idiot released some magical creatures in the classroom, and those creatures even stole his wand, Theodore commented while eating a piece of toast, his voice tinged with amusement and disdain. Even the usually quiet Blaze couldn't help but laugh at their friend's words. A light-hearted atmosphere hung in the air. However, Daphne's next words dampened the pleasant mood. Asterion, Grindelwald was seen on an island in Greece, Daphne said, catching everyone's attention. How did you find out about this? Asterion asked, slightly surprised. He had estimated that the man would remain in hiding for a while longer before emerging to complete his plan. So, the revelation that he had been seen caught him off guard. One of our magical plant suppliers in Greece informed us, Daphne replied, handing over the letter that had arrived that morning. Opening the letter, Asterion's eyes quickly scanned its contents. It was as Daphne had said, Grindelwald had been seen on the island of Crete in Greece along with his acolytes. As for the reason for his visit, the letter did not specify. Asterion narrowed his eyes. This letter was suspiciously credible at such a delicate time in the world. It was almost as if Grindelwald was intentionally shouting to the world where he was. Island, 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 Asterion murmured to himself. Why Crete? It was a deserted island that survived on tourism, there was nothing interesting about the place. Huh? Suddenly, he remembered something very important. Wasn't that body thief from Greece? It would make sense for Grindelwald to visit Greece if he were meeting Herpo the Foul. Imagining Herpo and Grindelwald together, plotting something sinister, made Asterion's eyebrows furrow deeply. Those two together meant trouble again. Herpo, in particular, was the most threatening in his opinion. Someone who had lived for over 2,000 years was not exactly simple. Asterion had seen that firsthand. Just the man's exquisite barrier techniques were dangerous, not to mention his accumulated knowledge. Fiddling with his ring containing the resurrection stone, one of the 3 deathly hallows, Asterion fell silent in contemplation. Everyone around him remained quiet, not wanting to disturb his thoughts, seeing how focused he was. But this silence was broken by Ophelia, who arrived with Ginny and Astoria. Who is Grindelwald? Were you not paying attention in history class? Astoria was at a loss for words at her friend's lack of knowledge and asked with a confused tone. I was asleep, Ophelia replied with a slightly embarrassed look. Classes were truly boring enough to make her fall asleep. Don't worry, everyone sleeps in that class, Tracy said with an amused smile, observing the 3 girls who had just arrived. Watching his embarrassed cousin, Asterion, who had snapped out of his contemplative state, rolled his eyes. Grindelwald is a Dark Lord, a wizard society has classified as evil, not without reason. The man killed hundreds of thousands of muggles and thousands of witches and wizards around the world. He was also the former lover of our dear Professor Dumbledore, Asterion calmly explained, swirling the purple liquid in a glass that Daphne had handed him. Ophelia fell silent, stunned. Astoria was stunned too, as were everyone else, to be precise. They weren't surprised by the hundreds of thousands of deaths, they already knew about that. But Asterion's last piece of information was too shocking. PFF. Tracy, who was drinking orange juice, spat it out while looking incredulously at Asterion. Holy shit! Grindelwald and Dumbledore were what? She asked again, confirming if she had heard correctly as she wiped her mouth full of juice. They were indeed lovers. Asterion, indifferent to the shocking news he revealed, replied again with an air of nonchalance. The news was so shocking to everyone that it felt like someone had cast a full-body bind curse on each of them. Just imagining that Gellert Grindelwald and Albus Dumbledore were lovers was so surreal that no one had ever imagined it. When Grindelwald came to England after being expelled from Durmstrang, he met a handsome young man named Albus, and they spent an entire summer locked in their room, Asterion said with a touch of sarcasm in his voice. Tracy's mind was processing the information at lightning speed, weaving a plot of hatred, love, and betrayal almost instantly in her mind. "This is plot for a book. I'll get rich if I write something like this," she murmured, looking at Asterion with increasingly bright eyes. She needed more information to complete her bestseller. "This really surprises me," Blaise commented, still with a shocked look on his face. Just imagining such deadly enemies as lovers made anyone's mind reel. Daphne nodded in agreement with Blaise's words. The news truly shocked everyone present. "I advise not to spread this information. Dumbledore would not appreciate having his past discussed by others," Asterion warned everyone. He could even imagine Dumbledore wiping the minds of all the students who heard about his past relationship. Everyone nodded and began to eat, enjoying the last moment before the tournament officially began. Chapter 126 Ophelia, Narcissa and Andromeda. 1. Observing the entrance to the Slytherin common room, Narcissa's lips curled into a smile as she spoke the password. Pure blood. The silver serpent coiled around the door seemed to come alive, slithering around as the doors opened, revealing the Slytherin common room. Almost 4 decades without changing the password, Narcissa murmured with a touch of nostalgia. There was a time when she, too, entered through these doors every day. Entering the common room, it was exactly as she remembered, except for the 2 thrones near the fireplace, which she assumed belonged to Asterion and his fiancée. Seeing the silver throne next to the black throne, Narcissa's eyes grew slightly colder. Daphne Greengrass had gained many benefits from being engaged to Asterion. Thinking of Daphne, Narcissa scoffed coldly. She did not like the young woman. One reason was the Greengrass family's pro-Muggle stance, but the main reason was Daphne herself becoming Asterion's fiancée. In Narcissa's eyes, Daphne was definitely not worthy of her handsome and adorable Asterion. No woman was, to be exact. If it were up to her, Asterion would never marry and would remain single. Perhaps it was a motherly feeling not wanting her son to finally leave home, but if asked if Narcissa had the same feeling about Draco, the answer would be no. Noticing the arrival of a stranger, the Slytherin students, who had been chatting cheerfully, looked stunned at the incredibly tall woman. Looking coldly at the students, Narcissa walked towards the boys' dormitory. She assumed Asterion would be getting ready in his room for the selection of the 4 representatives for the International Magic and Witchcraft Tournament, which was happening in an hour. "Definitely a relative of Asterion," one of the students commented, watching Narcissa head towards the boys' dormitory. His eyes followed her figure with a touch of lust. "Should we inform Lord Black?" a female student asked, rolling her eyes at her friend's infatuated expression. "Didn't you see her look? I think we'd die if we got close to her," another female student responded, rejecting her friend's suggestion without hesitation. Just remembering those cold blue eyes sent a shiver down her spine. "I think I saw Lady Greengrass enter Lord Black's room," one of the girls said, making the Slytherin boy and girl look at her in surprise. The three of them then thought things were getting interesting in Asterion's room. Unfortunately, we won't be able to see, the three sighed in regret. In their eyes, Narcissa was Asterion's mother, and catching her son in such a delicate situation would be a drama worthy of reprimand. Locating Asterion's room, Narcissa didn't even need to knock and tried to open the door, but failed. The door remained firmly closed, causing her eyebrows to furrow for a moment, but then she relaxed, thinking that Asterion would never have expected her to visit him at Hogwarts. As she expected, it didn't take long for the door to open, but the person who opened it made Narcissa's eyes grow even colder. Daphne, looking at the tall woman standing at the door, narrowed her eyes and greeted her future sister-in-law with an elegant smile. "Lady Black. Please, come in," she gestured for Narcissa to enter the room as if she owned the place. Passing by Daphne without looking at her and irritated by her clearly offensive attitude, Narcissa entered the room and saw a scene she did not like at all. Asterion was buttoning up his shirt, but Narcissa's eyes could see the red marks all over his abdomen, shoulders, neck, and his lips were slightly swollen. She pressed her lips tightly together but showed no apparent reaction. She still refused to believe that the child who once slept in her arms was now doing such things. Inside, however, she blamed Daphne entirely, thinking that she had seduced him. Her cousin was practically innocent when it came to such matters. If Bellatrix knew her thoughts, she would roll her eyes. "Asterion," Narcissa greeted her cousin with a smile. Asterion was genuinely surprised to see Narcissa. He hadn't been notified of her arrival but found the surprise pleasant. As if reading his thoughts, she responded naturally, "I came with Andromeda and other senators to attend the selection of Hogwarts representatives." Asterion nodded, and just as he was about to finish dressing, Daphne appeared in front of him and helped button his shirt. When she finished, she gave him a light kiss on the lips. Narcissa's smile was rigid. She was absolutely certain that Daphne was doing this on purpose to irritate her. Even so, knowing this, a slight malice emanated from her body. Asterion naturally picked up on this and looked at Narcissa, confused. She just smiled gently back at him, recovering her composure, though inside she wanted to strangle that audacious wench. "You arrived at a good time, sissy." Not minding Daphne patting his clothes to remove any wrinkles, Asterion spoke to Narcissa. He hadn't yet informed anyone about Ophelia's existence. It was a good opportunity to introduce her, especially with Narcissa and Andromeda present, as both would treat Ophelia well, something he didn't think Bellatrix would do. Narcissa looked at Daphne with a bit of coldness before turning her gaze back to Asterion, surprised by his words. Finishing dressing, Asterion kissed Daphne on the lips, thanking her for her earlier help, and said to Narcissa, "It's better to show you in person." Asterion didn't see it, but Daphne and Narcissa exchanged glances, not hiding the hostility in each other's eyes. Daphne didn't like Narcissa, who fancied herself as Asterion's mother and had an almost pathological possessiveness toward her future husband. She had heard from her mother about the possible bad relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but since Asterion had no mother, she wasn't worried, until she met Narcissa, who considered herself his mother. The woman was simply irrational. Narcissa, on the other hand, didn't like Daphne because she thought she was unworthy of being Asterion's wife. She was arrogant and spoiled, nothing elegant as one would expect from the future lady of House Black. Descending the stairs that led to the Slytherin common room, Narcissa, who was slightly behind Asterion, looked at the corridors of Hogwarts with a very nostalgic gaze. When her eyes fell on the girl with black hair and red eyes, she widened her eyes in shock. She automatically ignored the redhead and blonde beside the girl with red eyes. Asterion, you took your time, the selection is about to start, Ophelia spoke with a slightly exasperated tone, then her gaze focused on the tall woman behind her cousin. She saw those cold eyes looking at her with a shocked expression. Though confused by this, she said nothing. Asterion, her. Narcissa looked at the girl, speechless. Two bearers of the Black family's innate technique in the same era. This was completely unprecedented. Is she Sirius's daughter? That damned libertine, useless and irresponsible. She muttered while cursing her other drunken cousin with every vile epithet she knew. Asterion rolled his eyes at Narcissa's words. Poor Sirius, he hadn't done anything and was being reprimanded in every possible way. She is Bellatrix's daughter, though it hasn't been confirmed yet, as I haven't had time to go to Gringotts for the lineage test. Asterion's words shocked Narcissa. She is my niece. Though Narcissa murmured, this murmur was heard by everyone, including Ophelia, whose eyes widened in surprise. Chapter 127 Ophelia, Narcissa and Andromeda. 2. Ophelia, hearing Narcissa's murmur, widened her eyes and looked with surprise at the beautiful blonde woman before her. Aunt? She's my aunt. Ophelia's heart nearly skipped a beat as she saw Narcissa approaching. She felt Narcissa lift her chin, forcing her red eyes to meet her blue ones. Studying the girl's face closely, Narcissa couldn't help but be surprised at how much she resembled Bellatrix at the same age. The only difference was the color of her eyes and her straight hair. Bellatrix had green eyes and curly black hair. What is your name? Narcissa asked, releasing her chin. A little intimidated by Narcissa's aura and intense gaze, Ophelia took a deep breath to calm herself and responded, looking directly into her eyes. Ophelia Riddle. You really do look like my older sister, Narcissa said, her expression a bit complicated. From the surname, she could imagine who the girl's father was. She didn't know what Arcturus would do upon learning of the girl's existence, especially given that her father was Voldemort, who had killed Regulus. She even found it remarkable that Asterion allowed this girl to live with him, given that her father had killed Regulus, his father. Hearing that she resembled her mother, Ophelia's lips curled up happily. Rubbing her own forehead, Narcissa showed a helpless expression. She could foresee a huge headache coming to her family once again. Even so, seeing the girl's eager eyes looking at her, Narcissa smiled. The girl was innocent despite the monsters that were her parents. Your name is very beautiful, Ophelia, Narcissa said, gently stroking the girl's silky hair with a smile on her lips. Ophelia seemed like a puppy enjoying Narcissa's affectionate touch. It could be said that this was the first time someone had treated her with such kindness in her life. She loved this feeling of being cared for and loved, something she never wanted to be separated from. Holding Ophelia's hand, Narcissa turned to Asterion and spoke calmly. Asterion, I'm going to take Ophelia to meet Andromeda. We'll see you later. Her cold eyes briefly fell on Daphne, who was smiling at her while holding Asterion's arm. She scoffed coldly and left with Ophelia. Astoria, Ginny, we'll meet later. Though confused about whom she was being introduced to, Ophelia did not refuse and waved to her two best friends, who waved back. Astoria came to her sister's side, looking at Daphne with curiosity. Although the hostility between Narcissa and Daphne was well hidden, her sharpness allowed her to perceive that they didn't like each other. "Sister, what's going on?" Astoria whispered to Daphne, who stood next to Asterion. "We'll talk later," Daphne whispered back. She didn't want Asterion to know about the rift between her and Narcissa, as his involvement would only complicate matters further. Astoria nodded and asked no more, but she knew things were complicated between Daphne and Narcissa. The Great Hall was decorated with flags from the 13 countries, including Hogwarts. At the main table, all the ministers of magic were seated alongside the professors. A philosopher once said that humans are only truly happy when they are celebrating, and there was some truth to his words. Even during World War II on the Western Front, the Axis and Allies called a truce when Christmas arrived. Soldiers from both sides took the opportunity to sing carols together, exchange drinks, treat the wounded, and bury their dead comrades. They even prayed together, showing that a celebration could surpass even the strongest hatred. Hogwarts was no different at this moment. Even the ministers from Japan and China, who were mortal enemies, were conversing in a very friendly manner, a sight that would be practically impossible under normal circumstances. Andromeda, who sat with a gentle, sweet smile, was elegantly seated at her old house table, Slytherin. Her brown hair cascaded like a waterfall of silky, shiny strands over her shoulders, resting on her chest. Watching the children chatting animatedly, Andromeda's smile grew even gentler. She had wonderful memories of Hogwarts. It was here that she met her beloved husband and fell in love with him. Andromeda. Hearing her sister's voice, Andromeda turned and saw Narcissa walking towards her, but she was puzzled to see the young girl beside her sister. Observing the girl's appearance closely, she was surprised by the incredible resemblance she shared with her older sister, Bellatrix. "Sissy." Andromeda looked at Narcissa with a clearly very confused expression. "My niece, Bella's daughter, Ophelia Riddle." Narcissa held the girl's shoulder and gently pushed her forward, introducing her with a kind smile. Andromeda's eyes widened at her sister's shocking words, but looking at the almost identical appearance the girl shared with Bellatrix, she couldn't deny her younger sister's words. "This is Andromeda Tonks, your aunt, my sister." Narcissa introduced Andromeda to Ophelia, who was once again surprised. Today was definitely the best day of her life. She had met her two aunts, her mother's sisters, and seeing her aunt's gentle and warm demeanor, she knew her aunt was a good person. "Aunt Andromeda." Ophelia greeted her with a touch of happiness in her red eyes. "You really do look like Bella at this age, just as adorable as she was." Andromeda felt her heart almost melt being called aunt. She reached out and cupped Ophelia's face with a smile full of warmth and tenderness. Ophelia felt her cheeks warm at the compliment and suddenly hugged Andromeda. She hadn't done this with Narcissa because she was a bit afraid of her, but with Andromeda, it was different. She genuinely felt the warmth and tenderness emanating from the woman in front of her. If this was the warmth a mother felt for her child, she was even more eager to meet her mother. Though surprised by the hug, Andromeda didn't refuse and embraced her, bringing her close to her chest while gently stroking her hair with a happy smile. It had been a long time since she had done something like this. Her daughter Nymphadora had never been a child who sought affection, so she was very happy at this moment. "Can you tell me about my mother?" Looking up, Ophelia asked with a pleading look. "Of course, dear." Knowing she couldn't recount her older sister's crazy past, Andromeda could still remember the funny things that happened when they were children. Narcissa, who had sat down next to Andromeda at the Slytherin table, rolled her eyes as she watched her sister and niece getting along so well right away. It didn't seem like they had just met. Chapter 128 The Four Representatives of Hogwarts. 1. With the sound of metal colliding with the cup, the hall fell silent, and all eyes focused on the old man in a blue robe with a long white beard. Albus Dumbledore stood from his seat and smiled gently. To the participants from the 12 schools of witchcraft and wizardry, welcome to Hogwarts. He began his speech, his voice resonating between the walls of the hall. Dear ministers of magic, presidents, and senators. Dumbledore greeted all the esteemed figures in the hall with great good humor. Everyone mentioned raised their goblets in response to his words. Turning to look at the students, he continued in a loud voice. Today, I announce the beginning of the first international tournament of magic and witchcraft. A sea of applause filled the hall in an instant, with excited and enthusiastic shouts from the teenagers echoing through the crowd of young people. Dumbledore also clapped and laughed. Then, as the excitement gradually subsided, Hagrid appeared, holding a beautiful glass goblet in his arms, which he placed on a wooden pedestal. Thank you, Hagrid. Dumbledore thanked Hagrid as his eyes fell upon the goblet of fire. Frowning for a moment, he blinked a few times and showed a mysterious smile, quickly covering it and turning back to the students. It was an honor, Professor Dumbledore. With a loud and contagious laugh, Hagrid scratched his disheveled hair and spoke, but his eyes were not on Dumbledore but on an incredibly tall and beautiful woman at the teacher's table. Olympe Maxime, headmistress of Beauxbatons. Noticing this, Dumbledore showed a mischievous look and said, You may return to your seat, Hagrid, there is a vacant seat next to the headmistress of Beauxbatons. Hagrid nodded gratefully and walked to the teacher's table, where he sat beside Maxime, to her obvious annoyance. Clearing his throat, Dumbledore addressed the students once more. This is the Goblet of Fire, a powerful ancient magical artifact used in the early days of magic in Greece. It will choose the 4 most suitable representatives of Hogwarts to participate in the tournament. As Dumbledore spoke, the Greek Minister of Magic, Nicholas Papadopoulos, looked slightly somber. The ministers from other countries did not blame Nicholas for showing such a reaction, not when a historical treasure from his country was being used so blatantly in front of him, the Greek Minister of Magic. It is worth noting that it was not once or twice that the Greek government requested possession of the Goblet of Fire. Nonetheless, France, Russia, and England never returned the object to its homeland. Note: the Goblet of Fire remains in the school that wins the Triwizard Tournament, that is, France, Russia, and England. Ignoring the cold look that the Greek Minister of Magic was giving him, Dumbledore continued speaking. All students from the 4 houses must choose their representatives, and the goblet will choose the most suitable to represent them. I must add that for those chosen, the goblet will create a binding vow, and if the chosen one does not wish to participate, they will lose their magical energy forever. With that said, he waved his wand, and several pieces of paper flew through the air, landing in front of all the Hogwarts students. The students wasted no time and began writing with their own wands whom they wanted to represent them. At the Slytherin table. Daphne, don't put my name in. Asterion said to his fiancée. He definitely didn't want to get involved in a stupid competition that he would obviously win. Even if his name were put into the Goblet of Fire, it wouldn't work. The object was enchanted to refuse certain names, and his was among those names. Not that he thought anyone would actually choose him, even a blind man could see that a special grade wizard wasn't exactly fair to the other participants in the tournament, which was prohibited before the tournament began. Although she wanted to vote for Asterion, as he was the only one she trusted to bring the goblet to Hogwarts, Daphne showed a look of understanding and reluctantly wrote her friend Tracy's name instead, to Tracy's delight. "You're the best friend ever," Tracy said, hugging her with a big smile. "Opportunist," Daphne huffed coldly, but a smile played on her lips. At the Gryffindor table. "Rose, you can't vote for yourself. Besides, your name is obviously blocked," Hermione said, watching the white-haired girl write her own name on the paper. "Don't be a spoilsport, Mione. The most fun thing in the world is surprises." Smiling arrogantly, Rose twirled her wand between her fingers and spoke with an excited look. She wanted to participate in the tournament, even though her chances were minimal. After all, it was unrealistic for someone of her caliber to participate in something meant for young people with talent but not a monstrous level of talent. At most, the participants would be grade 1 or grade 2. So, Rose, a special grade witch, couldn't be chosen as the representative of Gryffindor. It would be like using a nuclear weapon against a country that didn't possess one. Hermione rolled her eyes at her friend's words. There was no surprise. In the eyes of the brown-haired girl, the hope of Rose participating in the tournament was minimal, if not impossible. No one would let a special grade witch participate in the tournament. "Hope is the last thing to die," Rose commented, quickly twirling her wand between her fingers. "Yes, yes, yes." Huffing, Hermione rolled her eyes and focused on the goblet of fire. It looked like a precious jewel, so beautiful it was, with bluish flames burning silently inside, as expected of the goblet that was created in Delphi, a sacred place. As Hermione watched, all the students began to form a line and threw their own tickets into the bluish flames. With each ticket thrown, the flames grew slightly, almost as if everyone's hopes were feeding the fire, making it stronger and more sacred. Watching student after student placing their tickets in the goblet, Dumbledore smiled gently. He could see the children placing their hopes and desires in the people they believed in. It was a beautiful thing, but the world had tainted this pure feeling by putting interests and greed above all. Suddenly, Rose casually appeared, throwing her ticket containing her vote into the bluish flames. "Old man, rest assured, this goblet will stay at Hogwarts again." As she spoke, the fire grew almost 30 centimeters in an instant, causing the crowd to gasp in surprise. Looking at the fire burning as strongly as never before, Dumbledore raised an eyebrow and thought silently. "This flame can bind a special grade wizard." Fortunately, Rose Potter's name was prohibited from being accepted by the Goblet of Fire, otherwise, she would have been chosen to represent Gryffindor. Chapter 129 The Four Representatives of Hogwarts, 2. Seeing the great blue flame, Rose smiled at Dumbledore and walked back to the Gryffindor table. She was more than confident that Hogwarts would win even if she didn't participate in the end. At the same moment, Asterion walked up to the Goblet of Fire. He passed by Rose, who winked at him and made a V sign with her fingers as she sat at the Gryffindor table. Asterion rolled his eyes at his cousin's antics and approached the Goblet of Fire. While staring intently at Dumbledore, Asterion threw his ticket into the fire, which flared up even more, burning furiously with its blue flames. Seeing this, Dumbledore's eyes narrowed. He noticed something unusual about the boy. Strong. That was the feeling Dumbledore had about Asterion. He was strong, after all, He was a special grade wizard, but he had become even stronger at that moment. This was something impossible according to the logic of this world. People didn't suddenly become stronger. This meant that Asterion had done something unnatural to increase his magical reserves so significantly in such a short time. Looking deeply at the 14-year-old boy, Dumbledore smiled gently and stroked his long white beard, although his eyes indicated he was thinking more deeply than usual. Returning to the Slytherin table, Asterion crossed his legs and looked at Dumbledore. He knew the man had noticed something, which was normal. His magical energy had more than tripled compared to the beginning of the first year. But in the end, it didn't matter if Albus Dumbledore knew about his strength. He was strong, and Dumbledore was equally strong. Both were like two great walls, preventing each other from acting against their interests. The only problem was Rose. The teenager was capable of breaking both walls if she wanted to, thus disrupting the delicate balance between them. While Asterion reflected, the entire voting ceremony ended, and Dumbledore approached the Goblet of Fire. Clearing his throat, Dumbledore waved his wand, and the fire in the goblet began to swirl, creating a large name made of blue flames, representing the House of Hufflepuff. Dumbledore announced excitedly, pausing dramatically before continuing as he saw the students couldn't bear the wait any longer. Cedric Diggory. A flood of applause and cheers erupted from the Hufflepuff table the moment Dumbledore's voice ceased. A very handsome boy with light brown hair and green eyes stood up with his fist raised high. Smiling gently at the young man who would represent Hufflepuff, Dumbledore looked once more at the Goblet of Fire. With the same wand movement, another name appeared, formed by blue flames, but the name that appeared made Dumbledore surprised for a moment. Representing the House of Ravenclaw. Dumbledore spoke in a strange tone. Luna Lovegood. Unlike the expected barrage of applause, silence fell when the small figure of the girl stood up at the Ravenclaw table. Her hair was blonde, almost white, and her eyes were ethereal blue. She wore 2 earrings shaped like carrots and had an amused smile on her lips. Unperturbed by the silence from her housemates, Luna waved amiably at Cedric, who was genuinely surprised to have a second-year teammate but still waved back. Looking into the girl's almost silver-blue eyes, Dumbledore smiled, unfazed. Surprises were always the most fun. Turning to face the Goblet of Fire once more and repeating the same wand movement, an enormous name formed of blue flames large enough for all to see appeared, making the silent room fall into an even deeper hush. Representing the House of Gryffindor. Rose Potter. Dumbledore's voice woke everyone from their stupor. Not only were the students stunned, but the ministers and presidents of magic were alarmed. Though they didn't know the true extent of Rose Potter's power, after the reports of the invasion of Hogwarts, it was clear that the girl was one of the 7 special grade wizards fighting that day. What is the meaning of this, Dumbledore? The Russian Minister of Magic, Dmitry Ivanov, rose from his seat, demanding with a deeply irritated voice. An aura of magic that belonged only to a special grade wizard emanated from him, making the atmosphere extremely heavy. Coldly huffing, Dumbledore released his magical aura, a warm but undeniably powerful force colliding with Ivanov's. In the clash of auras, the result was decided in an instant. The Russian minister was forced to retreat during the brief confrontation. Minister Ivanov, have patience. We will resolve this with a dialogue after the ceremony. Unconcerned with the almost murderous look from the Russian Minister of Magic, Dumbledore spoke, his voice tinged with authority and power. Grinding his teeth, Ivanov glared at Dumbledore with some resentment and sat down again, filling his wine glass and drinking it in one gulp. The other ministers and presidents did not rise or start a fight like Ivanov. As Dumbledore had said earlier, they would talk later. Seeing that no one else stood up, Dumbledore turned back to the goblet with a mysterious smile. He waved his wand, and the last name appeared for all in the hall to see. Seeing the name that appeared in the goblet, Asterion's face turned extremely grim. Representing the House of Slytherin. Asterion Black. Dumbledore's voice once again plunged the hall into silence. If the Ministers of Magic and the President of Makusa had been indifferent to Rose's selection, they now wore cold and grim expressions. What is this tournament? You want 2 special grade wizards to compete against grade 1 and 2 wizards. If there wasn't a conspiracy unfolding before them, they didn't believe it. Do you think we're fools, Albus Dumbledore? You have to expect some unusual surprises, Dumbledore quipped, ignoring the powerful individuals at the staff table, but no one laughed at his joke. Shrugging, the world's most powerful wizard didn't care and spoke again. Asterion and Rose Potter need to come with me to my office. Turning to the Ministers of Magic and the President, Dumbledore continued, I presume you would like to join us. They all huffed coldly at the man's cheerful tone and rose from their seats, leaving the hall in a heavy atmosphere. Take care. Looking at her fiancé's terribly cold face, Daphne whispered to him with concern. Asterion was somewhat moved by her concern and nodded, giving her a kiss on the cheek before heading towards Dumbledore. Rose was not far behind him, smiling with her hands behind her back, unfazed by the accusatory looks she was receiving from everyone at the Gryffindor table. Things are getting interesting, Littlestar. Rose leaned forward a bit, smiling, apparently very happy with the current situation. Asterion merely rolled his eyes at her comments, and they both reached Dumbledore. Dumbledore, Asterion greeted the man with a cold tone. Looking at his smiling face, similar to Rose's, he believed that everything happening was due to the man before him. Chapter 130 The 4 Hogwarts Representatives. 3. Dumbledore's office was crowded at that moment, a heavy atmosphere lingering in the air. All eyes were focused on a single man, the owner of the office himself. I believe we have a lot to discuss, Dumbledore said, indifferent to the unfriendly stares of the Ministers of Magic. Yes, Rose Potter and Asterion Black should not participate in the tournament. If they remain, it will not be a tournament, but an amusement park for the both of them, Louis Delacour said, and his voice was met with agreement from all the other ministers. That's not possible. Rose and Asterion are bound by the Goblet of Fire. If they don't participate, they will lose their magical energies, Dumbledore replied, causing everyone to fall silent. There was nothing more to say. Neither Rose nor Asterion would ever allow that to happen. Losing their magic was the same as killing them, especially Asterion. If something like that happened to him, all his cursed spirits would be unleashed. Everyone frowned in thought, and then the president of Makusa, Benjamin, proposed an idea. Why don't we limit their powers so they can participate in the tournament without it being unfair to the other participants? Everyone became contemplative. Although it was a good proposal, a special grade wizard with limited power was still a special grade wizard. In terms of magical energy control or spells, they would be far superior to the other participants. It's the only choice. What do you think? Dumbledore asked, looking at Asterion and Rose, who had remained silent until that moment. They looked at each other and saw what the other was thinking. It's fine, Rose agreed. She wasn't interested in crushing ants as soon as the tournament began. Besides, she had absolute confidence in fighting anyone below the special grade, even while limited. Looking at Asterion's cold face beside her, a smile appeared on Rose's lips. Because of the tournament, she would have a lot of time alone with her cousin, and it was a great opportunity for her. It's decided. Both will fight with the power of Grade 2 at all times. If any increase in power parameters is detected, Hogwarts will be disqualified from competing in the International Magic and Wizardry Tournament. Seeing this, Dumbledore's lips curved into a satisfied smile. He looked at all the ministers of magic from other countries and spoke with a serious and committed tone. They had no choice but to accept. Preventing Asterion and Rose from participating was the same as making enemies of 3 special grade wizards, something no country in the world wanted. Especially during this period when a world magic war seemed like a probable event. Asterion looked at Dumbledore in silence, the uncomfortable feeling of being manipulated resurfacing, but he wasn't sure if Dumbledore was involved or if it was someone else. We need to discuss what happened with the Goblet of Fire. My name and Rose's name were prohibited from being selected from the beginning of the tournament. It's very suspicious that the Goblet accepted our names, Asterion said, drawing everyone's attention. The shrewdest among them had already guessed that something suspicious was going on. Yes, the entire situation was very suspicious. Unconsciously, some discreet glances were cast towards the most powerful man in the world. Who was in possession of the Goblet of Fire? Rose asked beside Asterion, her eyes also narrowing. She did not doubt Dumbledore, it was too obvious to be him. Although she wanted to and was happy to participate in the tournament, she did not like being manipulated by someone with mysterious purposes. Dumbledore remained silent for a brief moment before uttering a name. Robert Crouch, a member of the Hogwarts Board of Governors. He continued speaking calmly. I will initiate an investigation immediately. I ask that you keep this a secret due to the delicate situation. Asterion narrowed his eyes and remained silent, he would investigate on his own. When the news of Asterion and Rose's participation in the tournament spread, there were many rumors, especially among the students from other schools. Competing against 2 special grade wizards was like placing 2 enormous mountains on their young shoulders. Fortunately, both would be limited to using the power of a grade 2 wizard, otherwise, they would simply give up and let Hogwarts win. It was impossible for them to fight against a special grade wizard, let alone 2. At this moment, Asterion and Rose were meeting their teammates. Asterion looked at the sparkling vampire with a strange gaze. Although he did not like the guy's performance in Twilight, he did an excellent job in The Batman. Cedric. Despite feeling Asterion's somewhat strange look, Cedric approached and extended his hand with a gentle and friendly smile on his lips. Asterion. Shaking his hand, Asterion introduced himself, though he found it a bit unnecessary. Suddenly, both turned and saw Luna crouched down, looking at Asterion's shadow with a bright gaze. How cute, a delicate and dreamy voice escaped her lips, making Asterion purse his lips. Cedric merely showed a strange look but felt a shiver run down his spine, seeing the hundreds of eyes appearing in his teammate's shadow. Cute? If that's cute, then I'm a dark wizard. Cedric thought skeptically, seeing her call that monster cute. What's his name, Chief? Luna poked his shadow with her finger and asked curiously. Her blue, almost silver eyes were fixed on his red ones. Baskerville. In the face of those incomparably familiar eyes, Asterion responded calmly, his eyes attentively studying the delicate and beautiful face of the girl. Although he knew that Luna had followed him at the beginning of his first year, he hadn't heard much about her since then, which was strange given how noticeable the girl was. Still, the biggest surprise was Luna being chosen by the Goblet of Fire to represent Ravenclaw. This showed that the second-year girl was more suitable than the 6th and 7th-year students. Do you know what the first task of the tournament will be? Leaning against the wall with her arms crossed over her chest, Rose asked with a curious look. Cedric shook his head, knowing nothing. We'll find out tomorrow when they announce it. Asterion said, moving away from Luna, who wouldn't stop trying to play with Baskerville. He could feel the increasingly angry mood of the cursed spirit toward the girl. Showing a cute and dissatisfied look, Luna pouted adorably and introduced herself. I'm Luna, a seer. She placed her hand over her lips and spoke gently. A silence spread through the environment. Everyone looked at Luna in shock. It was no wonder, as this was practically the rarest talent in the wizarding world and one of the most powerful. If a seer wants to escape, believe it, you will never find them if they don't want to be found. So, the news of Luna Lovegood being a seer was shocking, but at the same time, very good news for Asterion's team. Next chapter, second volume, Chapter 130, The Four Hogwarts Representatives, 3, Chapter 131, The First Trial, 1, Chapter 132, The First Trial, 2, Chapter 133, King's Game, 1, Chapter 134, King's Game, 2, Chapter 135, King's Game, 3, Chapter 136, King's Game, 4, Chapter 137, King's Game, 5, Chapter 138, King's Game, 6, 139, King's Game, 7, 140, King's Game, 8, 141, King's Game, 9, 142, King's Game, 10, 143, King's Game, 11, 144, King's Game, 12, 145, King's Game. 13, Chapter 146, Second Phase of the King's Game, 1, Chapter 147, Second Phase of the King's Game, 2, Chapter 148, Second Phase of the King's Game, 3,